students, pediatric residents, family practice residents, OBGYN residents, and in our hospital, as well as physicians in the community about sexual abuse and physical abuse.
Okay. And can you tell me what the hospital scan team does? What its function is?
The scan team's function is to review problematic cases of child abuse and neglect, problematic as far as diagnosis or intervention and treatment, and to manage the paperwork for all cases, whether they be problematic or not.
Okay, so that, if I'm correct, a child who is suspected or who has reported being abused sexually is brought to the hospital for examination by members of your team. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you or members of your team will undertake a physical examination of a child to see whether or not there are physical findings that support the reports of abuse.
That's correct.
Now, aside from your work at the King Drew Medical Center with the hospital scan team, do you hold any positions on committees concerned with sexual abuse of children?
Well, I'm a member of the California Association of Professionals, CAPSAC. I can't remember the full name of the organization. The eponym is CAPSAC. I am a member of the LA County Sexual Abuse Examiners group that meets every other month to review cases of review the physical findings in child abuse and neglect.
Do you work with the coroner's office in any capacity?
I was one of the founding members of the Coroner's Death Review Committee, but I wrote the original protocols for review of child death in Los Angeles County, but I'm not currently active in that committee.
Okay, but you have served on that committee in the past.
That's correct.
And are you also a member of the AAP Child Abuse Committee?
Yes, I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Child Abuse Committee.
Now, have you testified on prior occasions, Dr. English, as an expert in the area of the physical effects of sexual abuse of children?
Yes, I have.
And approximately how many times have you testified in court as an expert?
Between 100 and 150 times.
And have you testified as an expert in both criminal and civil cases?
Yes.
Directing your attention to the criminal cases that you've testified in, what percentage of those cases have you appeared as a witness for the prosecution?
I would say about 90% of those cases.
So in the cases in which you appear as an expert witness for the prosecution, are those cases in which a defendant, is being charged with sexually abusing children or a child?
Generally, yes.
Okay, and generally, does the prosecution call you as a witness to testify as to any physical findings concerning the crimes that have been charged against a defendant?
Yes.
Have you testified from time to time for the defense in criminal cases?
Yes.
And approximately what percentage of the times that you've testified in criminal cases have you testified as a witness for the defense?
In criminal cases, approximately 10%.
Now, you've told us that part of your job is to examine children who report sexual abuse to see if there are physical findings consistent with their reports. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you also examine children who report to be the victims of sodomy?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately, if you can tell us, how many children do you examine a year who report that they have been sodomized?
Between 75 and 100 personally.
And aside from those that you examine personally, do you supervise or review medical records of other children who report having been victims of sodomy?
Yes.
And approximately how many cases like that do you review, but not personally see?
Approximately the same number that are reviewed.
Okay, now when you say that you examine 75 to 100 children a year, what age group are you talking about?
The vast majority of the individuals I examine are under the age of 12 with allegations of sodomy.
And in addition to your personal experience, are you also familiar with the literature regarding the physical effects of sodomy on children?
Yes.
Now, Dr. English, is the timing of an examination for the physical findings of a child who reports sodomy a significant factor? That is when you see the child important?
Yes.
Okay, and why is it important?
It's important because the likelihood of finding physical changes drops off dramatically in child sexual abuse cases that involve sodomy. Of the number that I see each year that have positive physical findings, I would say a good 30% of those I have examined within 2 or 3 days of the event. So, and in view of the fact that there's a very small percentage that have any physical changes, I would, in the majority of children I see at some significant distance from the event, time-wise, I would have to conclude that the timing is very important. And the closer proximity to the actual event, the more likely there are to be physical changes.
Okay, and when you say closer proximity, do you mean within days, months?
I mean within days. I mean within a few days.
Okay, you mentioned a figure of 30% of the children that you examine within a period of days of the event.
Yes, of the total number of children that I examine that have histories of sodomy, approximately between 5 and 10% have physical changes. Now, and if you look at the total percentage of children, if you look at the total number of sodomy cases that I see, the vast majority, on the order of 90% plus of those children, more like 95% of those children, are seen at some time significantly removed from the alleged events, on the order of weeks to months. In the group that are positive, about 30% of those have been seen within a very few days of the alleged event. So I have to conclude that the time relationships are extremely important.
Okay, and why is that? Is there something about the anus that makes this timing important?
Well, there's something about any area that's injured, but the anus in particular. First of all, the anus passes large objects as a routine thing in the course of its functions. Secondly, it has mucous membranes that heal very quickly on the inner part of the anus, so that the combination of the fact that it's commonly sustains trauma, passing stool, and the fact that it heals so quickly means that you're not likely to see any physical changes. It's a very pliable organ. It can pass a substantially large object without sustaining that much trauma, and the trauma heals very quickly.
Dr. English, have you had available to read any portions of Erik Menendez's testimony concerning the sexual abuse that he suffered, or acts of sodomy actually by his father, that occurred from time to time between the ages of 12 and 18 years?
I have.
Okay. And did you also conduct a physical examination of Erik Menendez for evidence of any anal scarring or changes or findings that would be abnormal or consistent with having been sodomized from time to time by his father between the age of 12 and 18 years.
I did.
And what did you see?
I saw no physical changes that could be identified as indicative of prior sodomy.
And when did you conduct this examination?
It was in August of 1993. I don't remember the specific date.
And this was at the Los Angeles County Jail?
Yes, it was.
Were your findings upon a physical examination of Erik Menendez consistent with what you would expect to see given your experience with examining children who have been victims of sodomy?
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, you wouldn't expect to see significant changes to his anal area, scarring, or anything like that, given the history that was reported in Erik's testimony.
That's correct.
Let me ask you, Dr. English, if you were to have seen Erik Menendez within 3 days of the occasion on which his father first sodomized him at age 12, might you have been able to see some physical findings of that act?
I think might is a fair statement. Would have been more likely.
Okay.
Yes.
You first examined Erik Menendez in 1993. Would it have made any difference if you had examined him, say, in 1989? That is, would it be more likely that you would see evidence at that point in
It
time?
probably wouldn't have made any difference.
Dr. English, are you familiar with something called a colposcope?
Yes.
What is a colposcope?
A colposcope is a medical instrument originally developed for examining the female cervix that has a light attached and a magnification system. And many colposcopes also have cameras attached for recording the findings. They've been used for the better part of the last decade for evaluation of child sexual abuse cases. They are principally used for the evaluation of the genital findings in female children. They have been used for the evaluation of anal findings, but with much less success. And I believe that most people would consider using them, but they don't seem to be as valuable in the evaluation of anal findings, other than that they provide a magnification and they provide an opportunity to record the event if they have a camera attached.
Okay.
And virtually everybody that uses them for evaluation of child sexual abuse, of course, does have a camera attached.
Okay. And is that an instrument that you felt is necessary to use in examining Erik Menendez in this case?
No, I didn't believe it was necessary.
Dr. English, have you had access to certain medical records of Erik Menendez?
Yes.
And do those medical records show that from time to time as a child he was taken to the doctor for various and sundry reasons?
Yes.
Based on your review of those medical records, does it appear to you that he was ever given as a child any examination of a type that would be likely to disclose evidence of anal scarring or changes caused by acts of sodomy?
No.
Back in the 1970s, would you say that the medical community was as aware of or as sensitive to the problems of sexual abuse of children as they are now?
No.
Did you see any indication in Erik Menendez's medical records of an injury to his throat area?
Yes.
May I approach Your Honor with Exhibit 299?
Yes.
Thank you. A document that's been marked Exhibit 299 appears to be some typewritten medical record about Erik Menendez. Does that document indicate that there was an injury to the throat of Erik Menendez sometime in 1977?
Yes.
Okay, and what specifically does the medical record indicate was injured?
The direct quote is hurt posterior pharynx, uvula, and soft palate. Seen in emergency room, Princeton Medical Center.
Okay.
Healing well, symptomatic treatment. Actually, was seen the day before. This is the follow-up note.
Now, is there is the report of injury in that medical record that's before you is 299? Is that consistent with could that be caused by child sexual abuse, in your opinion?
Yes, could be.
And what do you have any opinion as to what type of child sexual abuse could have resulted in that particular complaint?
Oral copulation.
In examining Erik Menendez in August of 1993, did you notice that he had a scar on his left inner knee?
Yes.
And did that appear to be a wound that had been unsutured, that it is, it had gone untreated, unstitched?
Yes.
May I just have a moment, Your Honor? Yes. Thank you. I have nothing further this time.
Any examination on behalf of Lyle Menendez?
Doctor, do I understand you to say that of the roughly 75 to 100 cases that you personally see annually, that only 5 to 10% of those cases show any physical findings? Those are all cases involving allegations of sodomy?
That's correct.
And how do you know that that group of cases in any one year are in fact cases involving sodomy, as opposed to someone who's just making allegations?
That's a good question. A percentage of those cases that have independent corroboration. I've not personally been involved with any that involved independent corroboration in the form of videotapes. But independent confessions on the part of the perpetrators occur in maybe 5% of cases. And in those cases, the numbers aren't any different in terms of findings. If you are to look at the credibility of the history based on knowledge of child development, the description of the child, I'm talking about cases in which that credibility appears to be present. So I'm essentially going on the basis of the report of the child in the majority of cases.
And in other words, this 75 to 100 cases are cases where you personally are making some determination that these appear to be credible reports of sodomy.
That's correct.
And in a certain group of those cases, those credible reports are corroborated by other information, such as confessions of perpetrators.
Correct.
And even in those cases, you're saying that you will have someone who has confessed to committing sodomy and yet you will not have physical findings?
That's correct.
Do some of those cases involve fully grown adult males perpetrating the crime of sodomy against youngsters approximately 6 to 8 years of age?
Approximately 90%, 90 to 95% of the cases involve fully adult males. A small percentage are young teenagers, but the majority are adult males.
Right. And you said you personally have not seen a case involving a videotape. Have you heard of such cases? That is, cases where you have a videotape of someone committing the crime of sodomy where there is no physical finding.
Yes,
Now, did you conduct a similar examination on Lyle Menendez as you testified to with respect to Erik Menendez?
I did.
Was that examination conducted in August of 1993?
Yes.
What did you do in the examination?
I did a complete physical examination, including a anal inspection and digital examination.
And can you tell me the results of your examination with respect to Lyle Menendez?
There were no physical findings on the anal exam.
Were there any physical findings at all on physical inspection, not only of the anal area, but any place else on the body?
There were a few non-specific scars, and there was one scar on the lower lip. It appeared to be a non-sutured scar.
Could that scar on the lower lip have been caused by someone punching someone in the face?
That is what Lyle related to me as the cause of the scar, yes.
And did you also take a medical history from him concerning sexual abuse by his father?
Yes,
Did you also review the testimony that he gave here in this trial concerning the sexual abuse that had been perpetrated on him by his father when he was approximately 6 to 8 years of age?
yes, I did.
Was the testimony that he gave to the jury consistent with what he told you about the sexual abuse?
Yes,
And does the absence of trauma to his anal area indicate to you that the absence of those findings is inconsistent with his testimony? Is there an inconsistency between the
No.
absence of findings of
No.
anal trauma and his testimony and his report to you of a history of sexual abuse?
no, there's no inconsistency.
You talk about unsutured. Could you describe what you mean by that?
Well, I misspoke. It was an unsutured scar. Of course, it was a scar that appeared never to have been from a laceration that had never been sutured.
Did you, in addition to examining Lyle Menendez, also review his medical records?
Yes,
And did those medical records span a period from approximately March of 1971 to July of 1989?
yes.
Was there anything remarkable about the medical history in terms of findings that were made by other physicians that you reviewed?
There were a significant number of physician visits.
All right. Let me ask more.
Significant number of records of physician visits, I should say.
Did you see in the medical history certain injuries which had been treated by other physicians?
Yes,
For instance, was there an indication that when Lyle Menendez was 3 years old on March 9th, 1971, that he had a injury sutured as a result of a dog biting him in the face?
yes, I recall that, I believe.
And do you recall in 1974 there was a report of an injury to hematoma to the left side of his face?
Yes,
And in the same year, 1974, when he was 6 years old, a report of an injury of a 1.5 laceration to his right eyebrow.
yes,
Was there also a history that he had what's called an epigastric hernia when he was 7 years old?
yes.
What is that?
It's a failure of the muscles of the abdomen to be completely contiguous, so that a small part of bowel comes out between the muscles, essentially.
Is there any indication that that specific injury is caused by sexual abuse, or can it be caused by a wide variety of
Well,
things?
it's congenital. One is born with it, and the degree to which it becomes a problem determines when it needs surgical attention. But it's a congenital formation of the bowel and the abdominal wall.
Right. And did the medical history also include a history in August of 1976 of a speech articulation disorder and below grade level school performance?
Yes,
Did it also include an entry on August 4th, 1978 that he grinds his teeth?
I believe, I don't remember the exact date of the teeth grinding, but I remember the teeth grinding.
And were there also Was there also a report in October 28th, 1976 of stomach pains?
Yes.
And on March 7th, 1977, global headaches?
Yes.
What does that mean, global headaches?
I'm not sure.
Right? Was there also various reports from 1971 to 1989 of complaints of headaches?
Yes.
Would any doctor looking at that full range of symptoms been alerted to the possibility of sexual abuse just looking at this medical history if it was all presented at once?
Rephrase the question.
Would a doctor who was presented with the physical symptoms, which I just reviewed for you, have been clued in any way to the possibility of sexual assault based solely on those symptoms?
Are you asking if they were all presented at one time in
Right.
one patient at the
Hypothetically.
same time?
Yes.
Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Oh, objection overruled.
I certainly don't believe that I'm not aware of any physicians in the 1970s that would have even thought of a diagnosis of child sexual abuse. The same symptom constellation today, probably a small percentage of physicians would make that connection, even though many of those things are symptoms that are seen in children that are sexually abused over a long period of time. I don't believe that the average physician, or even the average pediatrician, would make that connection.
And even today, with the advanced state of knowledge that there is with the examination of child sexual assault victims, do physicians miss possibilities that a child has been sexually abused?
Certainly.
And back when some of these examinations were made, that is the examinations made by physicians who examined Lyle Menendez, for instance, in 1971 when he was 3 years old, or 1974 when he was 6 years old, was the state of knowledge such at that point that it was even a higher likelihood that a physician may have missed indications of child abuse?
Absolutely.
That's all I have. Thank you. Excuse me. Why did you make the physical examination in this case? The possibility of finding physical findings was so small after so many years.
I was asked to by the defense attorney that asked me to consider examining the records in the first place.
And was it your understanding that Dr. Hart had requested that report be done, or that examination be done?
No, I recall only the conversation with Paul Moniz regarding whether to do the examination or not.
Paul Moniz is a consultant on the case.
That's correct.
And did I inform you that Dr. Hart testified that he was the one who originated
Yes,
the
you did. You
request?
did inform me, but I wasn't aware of it at the time.
And were you also informed that Dr. Hart is a psychologist, not a physician?
Yes.
And when you were asked to do the examination, did you indicate to anybody that the chances of finding physical evidence of anal penetration on someone like Lyle Menendez, who was reporting a history of sexual abuse at age 6 to 8 after approximately 20 years, was virtually zero?
Overruled.
Yes, I did. I've lost the question.
Well, let's withdraw the answer and start.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, Your Honor.
The answer is stricken. Let's rephrase the question.
Did anyone indicate, did you indicate to anyone when you were asked to make this examination that the possibility of finding physical evidence of anal penetration on Lyle Menendez, who had given a history of sodomy between the ages of 6 and 8, was virtually nil after approximately 4 years?
Yes, I indicated that I thought it was extremely unlikely.
And you were told to nevertheless go ahead and make the examination?
Well, he said that he would get back to me about it, and I was quite frankly surprised, considering the degree to which I had said that I didn't believe there would be any physical changes, that he did ask me to do examination.
And did you tell him the same thing with respect to Erik Menendez,
Yes.
even though the historyist Erik Menendez was more recent in nature?
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Cross-examination?
Dr. English, I believe you indicated that 90% of the cases where you testify regarding child sexual abuse, you testify for the prosecution, correct?
That's correct.
And in those 90% of the cases, are you testifying to physical findings of child sexual abuse?
Certainly the vast majority of the cases, yes.
Okay. You indicated that of the 5 to 10% of the victims who do have physical findings of sodomy, that 30% of those are seen within days of the claim of the act, correct?
That's correct.
What about the other 70%?
Well, 70%, the other 70% are seen at some more remote time and have scars in the anal area indicative of probable sodomy.
Does anal tearing always accompany sodomy?
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
In your experience?
In my experience, it hardly ever accompanies sodomy.
Pardon me?
In my experience, anal tearing hardly ever accompanies sodomy. I guess I'm stuck on the question because one would assume that with a hard stool or an active sodomy, that there's probably micro tearing within the anal verge that we wouldn't appreciate other than by redness if we examine somebody immediately after an extremely hard stool or an episode of sodomy. I'm responding to, I can only respond to what I see, which is very seldom any indication of anything. What is required for me to see anything is, of course, a substantial tear of the anus and a tear that is external to the anal verge, so that it would be caused by sodomy rather than by some other physiologic event, such as a very difficult to pass stool.
If you find anal scarring in a victim that you're examining, can that be diagnostic of sodomy?
If the location of the scarring and the size of the scarring is appropriate to that diagnosis, yes, it can be.
Does the frequency of the sodomy affect the possibility of finding anal scarring?
I think it's a difficult question to reliably answer. In those cases in which we've been able to appreciate physical changes, it appears as if one episode of sodomy caused it. In other words, there was one vigorous episode of sodomy that appeared to have caused a laceration. One could speculate that as the number of episodes increase, then the likelihood of there being an episode that caused tearing would increase. On the other hand, if the number of episodes increase and they're in some temporal relationship to one another, then the likelihood of scarring would diminish during that period because of the that during that period the sphincter would presumably become a little less reactive. So that I think it's a very difficult question to reliably answer, and I don't believe anybody has any reliable scientific knowledge of.
So you're aware of no studies that make that correlation?
That's correct.
Now, you indicated that you saw in the medical records of Erik Menendez a throat injury that you've described for the jury in your direct examination.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, have you ever worked in an emergency room?
Yes.
And aside from the fact that this could have been caused by oral copulation, are there other things that cause injuries to children's mouths and throats?
Certainly.
What, such as
Falls on objects,
falls?
bicycle falls. There are other things that cause such injuries.
Do children have a habit of putting things in their mouths that don't belong there?
Yes.
Toys and things like that?
Yes.
And from the medical records you have, are you able to determine that whether this is a burn or a bruise or a laceration, the injury that's described in the medical record, Exhibit 299?
No, it's a non-specific description.
All right, so without a more specific description, would that lessen the certainty of your diagnosis of what it could be?
Oh, I didn't mean to express any certainty that I thought it was from oral copulation, only that that's one of the things that could have caused it.
And if in fact the injury was a burn, that would be contraindicative of oral copulation, but rather maybe swallowing hot liquid, correct?
Well, a burn would, I think that of the choices you could have made, a burn would be the least likely to give the findings involved, because there was no indication of any burn to the rest of the mouth. So it seems unlikely a child would swallow liquid and it would only burn the posterior pharynx and wouldn't bother the tongue or the lips or anything else. But there are certainly plenty of other childhood accidents that could cause injury to the posterior pharynx and spare the tongue or lips.
Do children sometimes swallow things that cause injury to those portions of their throat?
They sometimes swallow lye. Young children do, that cause injuries there, yes. But that swallowing something, I think, would be unlikely to cause an injury there. Be more likely to fall.
Of the cases where you have made determinations, the 75 to 100 cases per year where you make these determinations, you have no scientific way of correlating the physical findings with the truthfulness of the children who claim to be sodomized, correct?
That's scientific, meaning
Well, there's no machine.
no,
that you
there's
can-
no machine.
Okay, and so when you are doing these examinations, you talk to the children, correct?
That's correct.
You examine police reports if they're available.
That's correct.
What else do you do in order to verify the truthfulness of the claim of child abuse?
That's the limit of what I have available
All right,
to
so
make that determination.
so when you are making examination of,
I'm sorry. I occasionally have eyewitness reports as well.
which would be
But
part of
still,
the police reports.
yes.
Okay, have you ever done a correlation between the percentage of children who have physical findings for sodomy and the percentage of those cases which are actually found to be true? Do you understand my question?
I think so.
Do you want me to do it again?
Please.
Okay. If let's say you examine 100 cases a year for purposes of percentages, and you find that 5 to 10% of those have physical findings that would be consistent with a claim of sodomy.
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever done any follow-up to determine if, in fact, all of the 100 cases you saw that year, which percentage of those turned out to be true?
I'm going to object. It's vague.
Do you understand the question?
Yes, I think I understand the question. Well, within the,
Okay, I can make it real simple.
Okay.
Let me redo it. Okay. How do you know if a child's telling you the truth?
I base my opinion as to whether the child's telling the truth on the credibility of the history given, its reproducibility, its use of the child's own terminology within the limits of the child's exposure to other terms by others, those kinds of things. And coupled with, in those cases that have physical changes, of course, the physical examination. And if there are independent corroboration, such as a confession or an eyewitness, then that would add to the knowledge base.
When you interview these children who you then examine, would that be in the course of a few hours?
Yes.
And do you do follow-up studies with these children, follow-up visits?
On occasion, the majority of cases we do not.
Basically, children are brought to you for an initial physical diagnosis, correct?
That's correct.
And not for treatment or anything else?
I don't know, not for direct treatment. The only children that I would get involved in direct treatment would be those children that had fecal soiling in association. That's a very small percentage.
Now, I believe you indicated that as to Lyle Menendez, you looked at his pediatric medical history, and what you found remarkable about it were the number of visits,
Objection, United States 11.
Rephrase the question.
the number of recordations of visits.
Well, objection to the first part of the question. that he
All right,
found
yes, why don't you rephrase that?
When you looked at Lyle Menendez's medical records, did you find an above average number of pediatric visits for a child of his age?
Well, I was specific about an above average number of recorded visits because being a physician and working with medical records, it's often very difficult to get a hold of medical records. So to find that many documented visits is unusual.
All right, did it appear that he was taken to the doctor a lot?
It did.
I believe you indicated that you noticed some stomach pains recorded in Lyle Menendez's history. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are stomach pains diagnostic of sexual abuse?
No.
Okay, are they diagnostic of other kinds of childhood ailments,
Of course.
such as the flu?
Yes.
Could also be diagnostic of stress,
Yes.
and it could be diagnostic of stress associated with things other than sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
Are headaches diagnostic of sexual abuse?
No.
And are they, when I use the term diagnostic, what do you understand me to be saying?
That could be the only explanation.
Okay, so there are other explanations for children having headaches, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, the fact that you found no anal scarring in either of the defendants doesn't mean to you that they were not sodomized, correct?
That's correct.
But there's another, isn't it also true that another explanation is that they weren't anally penetrated? If there's no such findings.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Let me redirect.
Very briefly. Dr. English, when children come in and report that they've been sodomized, you take a history from them, right?
That's correct.
And you also do a physical examination.
That's correct.
And based upon both that, you come to some internal conclusion or your own conclusion as to whether or not this is a credible report. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you been involved in cases in Los Angeles County in which the prosecution has charged someone with an act of sodomy absent physical findings?
Yes.
Okay. And have you also been involved in that case in testifying as an expert that many times there are not physical findings of sodomy in a child?
Yes.
And have you also been involved in cases in Los Angeles County in which the prosecution has proceeded with charges of sodomy without corroboration, such as physical findings or a confession by the perpetrator?
Objection, irrelevant,
Sustained.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you about the throat injury that's in exhibit, I believe, 299 in front of you. And you
Yes.
said that could have been caused by oral copulation. Is that correct?
Correct.
You can't say what caused that particular injury.
No.
Would it have been helpful, would it be helpful to you to have the emergency room records referred to in that exhibit? Because there apparently was an initial visit at the emergency room the day before.
It might be helpful.
Okay, and have you been told that we, meaning the defense, has tried to obtain those emergency room records and have been unable to do so?
Excuse me, that is hearsay.
Sustained.
Does the age of the child have any affect the frequency with which you would expect to see physical signs of sodomy?
Yes and no. In those rare cases of children under the age of 5 that are sodomized, I would say are relatively rare cases. I would say the incidence of positive physical findings might be somewhat higher than it is in older children. But the vast majority of cases of sodomy that are alleged are in children older than that, 5 and up. And in those cases, the likelihood of physical changes is very small. Even in the children under the age of 5, the likelihood of physical changes doesn't exceed 10 to 15%, even though I think the average layperson is surprised by that, but that's our experience.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
You use the term suture. Does that mean stitches?
Stitches, yes.
Should have stitches.
Yes,
That's all I have.
sorry.
Anything else? Yeah, thank you. You may sit down here.
Thank you.
Let me see council at the sidebar, please. All right, we'll recess then until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I was discussing the schedule as to when the next witness will testify. Although the witness is here, that testimony won't be completed, so we might as well start off fresh tomorrow morning. So we'll see everybody back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see both juries back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The hearing relating to the privileged sessions involving the defendants and their dealings with Dr. Oziel. There were 2 areas to be resolved. One of them has to do with the December 11 tape recorded conversation that the December 11th session that was tape recorded. And there has been an assertion of the attorney-client privilege in relationship to that particular session. And the court is in the process of completing its findings of fact that relate to that. One of the obstacles to that finding of fact has to do with what actually occurred in that session. There was a finding by Judge Albrecht that the session was for the purpose of therapy, and the Supreme Court found that there was substantial evidence of that as well. The session itself has not been made or is available to me, but I haven't been privy to it. Unless counsel dispute the finding that it was for the purpose of therapy, the court will incorporate that in the court's findings.
Well, I think the issue is whether that implies that the court is finding that's the only and
Well, the only way the court can make an adequate evaluation of it is to hear the tape. You're asking the court to deal with this without knowing what other courts have already been made aware of, rather.
If I might be heard on that, Your Honor, that's like saying that in order to determine that Dr. Vickery's notes, for example, are covered by the attorney-client privilege, you'd have to read the notes.
No, that's different. The way the foundation was presented to this court and the testimony this court heard, the issue is substantially different.
I don't believe there's any factual issue that there was attorney direction vis-a-vis the specific content that should be in this tape, or what words should be used, or what format should be followed. I think it's sufficient if there is a purpose, a potential legal purpose that the attorney directs or acknowledges or desires, and more important, if there's an understanding by the clients that it's the attorney's wish, acknowledgement, accession to such a thing that should rule. And it shouldn't matter what the exact words are that occur in the session if the purpose before it begins is a legitimate attorney-client purpose.
Well, there is more to it than that, and the court did hear the evidence, and the court feels that the characterization of the session itself is circumstantial evidence of what transpired and what the state of mind of the participants was and what their purpose was. And there has been a finding by another court and endorsed by the California Supreme Court that session was for the purpose of therapy. And the court feels that a finding in that regard is significant in its overall findings in the matter. And unless counsel dispute that was the function of what occurred during that session, that it was a therapeutic session, then the court
Well, Your Honor,
can deal with only what's been presented to
the
it.
California Supreme Court did not have the information that this court has about what preceded that session. So, that this doesn't seem to make, and this doesn't make a great deal of sense. What the Supreme Court may be saying is that it reads like a therapy session, and that certainly could have been one of its purposes, but it may have had another purpose that they're not aware of because no one presented them with the evidence.
All right, well, you say it could have been for that purpose of therapy.
You can have both purposes.
Well, that's a legal issue that we will discuss, but at this point, as far as findings of fact, the court must make a determination as to the session itself, as to whether it was a therapeutic session. I think that's a significant part of the issue, the findings of this, on this issue.
I don't understand why. It could be.
Well, I've said it, I've told you why, and you either do or don't understand, but that's my view, that I do have to make that as part of my findings.
And perhaps in response to the court's statement, the procedure outlined in the Lifshitz case would be applicable to this problem as well. It's not exactly analogous because there the court was dealing with a session which was admittedly privileged, and the question is, does the exception for patient litigant apply? And the court said in that situation, the court could require the claimant of the privilege to reveal in a general way the subject matter of the following session so that the court could determine the issue of relevancy. And it would seem that that same procedure could be followed here. That is, we should be entitled to go in camera and outline for the court in a general way those areas that we think are relevant to the issue of the purpose of the session. And that would seem to satisfy the court's concerns, especially since the court has available to it the opinion of the Court of Appeal, which, if my recollection serves me, does address the content of the December 11th session.
Well, all these other judges apparently know what it is, but you don't want me to know what was said on that tape.
Well, the court frames it in terms of our not wanting you to know. I think we're legally obligated to claim the privilege, and that one problem in doing that is that we would potentially be in a position of having the prosecution claim a waiver, since we then would have disclosed to the court a significant part of the communication. I see no response to the argument that by revealing that, disclosing it to the court when we have the opportunity and obligation to claim the privilege, that somehow would waive the privilege.
Well, you've made disclosures to the court in camera regarding other conversations and communications that you felt were appropriate to deal with the subject.
That's true, and we've done so typically with a court ruling that would not be revealed. It's a little bit different here.
Well, it again would not be revealed unless the court found that there was a waiver or no attorney-client privilege attaching to this conversation. The same would apply to that as to anything else that's been disclosed.
Your Honor, the people will not claim, if the defense does in fact provide the court with the information, the people will not claim that that's a waiver such that we should be entitled, based upon that fact alone, to the context. I mean, Mr. Burr just argued that if they...
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, and we're not going to do that.
But you're not the ones.
And the court can certainly order us to disclose it over our objection and then make the ruling based on the court's order.
Well, your position is the court doesn't have the authority to do that. I'm saying that what's been presented to me as a finding by another trial judge who apparently listened to the tape recording and found that it was for the purpose of therapy, and the Supreme Court endorsed that, finding there was substantial evidence to support that ruling. And unless somebody presented me something else, that's how I would have to interpret it as well. And the only other thing that you could present to me would be the tape recording itself, so that I could then listen to it and make my own independent evaluation.
Well, I'm just not sure under that analysis what the court is looking for. Is the court looking for discussions of a legal nature? Suppose the sessions are therapeutic. In other words, it's just Dr. Oziel discussing various topics with the brothers. and there does not appear to be any reference to lawyers or legal cases. It would be our position, or legal issues, it would be our position that the court would still have to evaluate that in light of the testimony that you heard in camera as to why that therapeutic session took place.
I understand that. I'm just saying this is a part of the overall picture that I haven't been presented with yet. I'm not ignoring everything else that has been presented to me, but I have not been presented with that.
This is something I would like to discuss with code counsel.
Sure.
It's obviously an issue that was just presented to us, and maybe we can resolve it on the basis that the court suggests. I would like the opportunity to argue my position with code counsel.
Yeah, all I'm saying is that this is, in my view, a necessary part of the fact-finding process. And before a ruling can be made, we start with findings of fact, and then we look at the law, and then we make a decision. So at this stage, I'm still in the process of finalizing the findings of fact. All right. In regards to the other sessions involving Oziel that were not tape recorded, it has been the position of the parties that we wait until we resolve the tape recording before we go forward. Is that still what you want to do, or do you feel that there's a basis to go ahead with the other portions? It seemed like the prosecution wanted to wait until that was resolved because it might change their posture in regards to the others in one way or another.
I think we should.
Yeah, I think that would be a good use of time.
So long as we don't wait past the time when our case is over.
Well, we can only deal with it as the issue is presented, and the court had to first deal with the claim of patient-therapist privilege, and that issue could not be resolved until the experts had all testified and the issue finally been presented by way of evidence to make a determination as to whether a mental condition or emotion had been tendered by the defense.
We can present our position to the court as to the December 11th date, first thing tomorrow morning, and assuming the decision is to submit the December 11th session to the court, and we can proceed with that.
Okay. All right, then let's resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
John, Jon, Nickel, Nickel.
Mr. Nickel, what is your occupation
I'm a security investigator,
and where do you work?
Miramar Sheraton Hotel,
How long have you been working there?
approximately 2 years.
Did you hold a different job in 1987 and into 1988?
Yes, I did.
What were you doing in
I-
1987 and 1988?
I worked for Big Five Sporting Goods,
And were you working at a particular store?
the Santa Monica location.
Would you look at the board that's next to you and see if you recognize a photograph of the Big Five store that you worked at in 1987 and 1988?
Yes,
Your Honor, for the record, that's a photograph that's been previously marked as Exhibit 290. Do you also recognize beneath this photo of the Big Five store, a photograph showing the streets where the store is located?
yes.
And that's a store that's on Wilshire Boulevard?
Corner of Wilshire and Franklin.
Okay. When did you begin working at the Big Five at the corner of Wilshire and Franklin in Santa Monica?
I believe it was August of 1987,
And how long did you work there?
approximately 6 months.
So you stopped working in about February of 1988.
Correct.
Were you working full-time or part-time?
I was a part-time employee,
And as a part-time employee, how many days a week did you work?
3 to 4.
And on the 3 to 4 days a week that you worked, how many hours a day were you at the store?
6 to 8 hours.
During the time you worked at the Big Five, were you assigned to a particular department?
Yes,
And what department were you assigned to?
the guns and fishing department.
Now, also on the board, I've put up a series of photographs that have been previously marked 281, 282, and 284. Would you look at those and see if you tell us if you recognize what's in those photographs?
Yes, those are the display cases to the gun department, the counter where the gun department is.
Okay, and that's in the Big Five that you worked at?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Nickel, Since you stopped working at the Big Five in February of 1988, have you had occasion to visit that store from time to time?
Yes.
Approximately how often?
Several times for shopping purposes.
Okay. Have you, did you go there recently?
Yes, I did.
And when did you go there recently?
First Sunday of this month, I believe it was the 3rd.
That'd be the 3rd of October?
Yes.
And did you go there because someone asked you
Yes, I
to
did.
visit the store? Who asked you to visit the store?
Armando Lopez.
And did Mr. Lopez give you any instructions about what you were supposed to do when you went to the store?
He asked me if I would view the gun department and to see how it looked and if I could recall anything regarding it.
Okay. And did you go there on October 3rd and look at the gun department?
Yes, I did.
And when you went there on October 3rd, did the gun department appear to you to be in the same condition or look the same as you remember it when you last worked there?
It looked the same as I recall.
Okay. And do the pictures that are up on the board also show the gun department in roughly the same configuration as you recall when you worked there in 1988?
Yes.
There are also some photographs in front of you that have been previously marked. Would you look at those and see if those are also photographs that show that particular department at the Big Five on Wilshire and Franklin in Santa Monica?
Yes.
When you, okay, for the record, Your Honor, the numbers of the exhibits that are in front of the witness but not on the board are 283, 285, 286, 287, and 288. Mr. Nickel, when you first went to work for the Big Five, were you experienced with guns? Did you have any prior handgun?
No, I had no knowledge of guns.
Okay, so you learned as you went along?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to the guns that are contained in the glass case. They're depicted in the photographs on the board. Are those real guns?
No, they are not.
Okay. When you first started working at the Big Five, could you tell whether or not those guns in the cabinet were real or not?
I didn't know.
Okay. Is there any sign on the cabinet saying these are pellet guns, they're not real? Anything like that?
Then, no. Now I don't know.
Okay. And also directing your attention to some rifles that appear in the photographs in the upper right-hand area. Were those rifles there when you worked at the Big Five in 1988?
I don't know if those particular rifles were there, but there were rifles there, yes.
Okay, so there were rifles displayed in a
Correct.
similar manner. Okay. The rifles that were displayed in the manner depicted in that photograph, are they real or fake or a combination of the two?
Then, when I was working there, we had a combination of them. And there, I don't know.
Okay, so when you were working there were rifles displayed as shown in the photographs, and some of them were real and some of them were just
Yes.
pellet guns or air rifles.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, thank you very much. I have nothing further.
Any examination on behalf of Lyle Menendez?
No.
Cross-examination?
Mr. Nickel, are you a friend of Mr. Armando Lopez?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been a friend of his?
Several years.
Did you know him when you were working at the Big Five in Santa Monica?
No, I did not.
So you met him after you stopped working there?
He was a friend of the family. I didn't actually know him personally. Afterwards, I did.
Was he a friend of your family, to your knowledge, at the time that you were working at Big Five?
Yes.
Were there any handguns sold at the Big Five that you've referred to during the time that you worked there in 87 and 88?
No.
Was there a waiting period for pellet guns when you worked at the Big Five between 87 and 88?
I don't believe so.
Were there any weapons that you sold when you worked at the Big Five that required a 14 or 15-day waiting period?
Honestly, I don't recall.
You're aware of the fact that the laws about shotguns and rifles has changed in the last few years about them now requiring a waiting period?
Objection, assumes facts not in evidence.
Rephrase the question.
Are you aware that the law has changed in regards to the waiting period, which is now applicable to shotguns? And
I wasn't aware, no.
all right, so in 1987 or 88, did you have any weapons, to the best of your recollection, which required a waiting period?
No,
Pardon me?
there was no waiting period, to my knowledge.
When you worked at the Big Five during this time period, did you in fact sell real shotguns?
Yes,
And in order to purchase those shotguns during the period of time that you worked there, was paperwork required to be filled out by the purchaser?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond scope.
yes,
And did that paperwork require the production of identification?
yes.
And were you working in that Big Five in August of 1989?
No,
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mrs. Bozanic asked you about your relationship with Mr. Lopez. Are you coming here today because of any friendship with Mr. Lopez?
no, he had asked, we had discussed the situation regarding Big Five. He asked if I was willing to testify. I said I was.
Okay. And you're not getting paid or anything to
No.
be here? You're just coming because you have some information?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next witness.
My name is Edward Fenno, Fenno. Get some water.
Can the witness have some water? Okay. Okay, Mr. Fenno, do you both work and go to school?
I go to school and I'm doing an externship right now.
And where do you go to school?
USC Law Center,
You're a law student?
law student.
And your extern is sort of a job?
I work full-time for a federal judge, but I get full school credit for it
Okay. For a federal judge here in Los Angeles?
in Los Angeles. I don't get paid, I just get school credit.
Okay. And are you acquainted with Lyle and Erik Menendez?
Yes.
And how did you make their acquaintance, or either of them?
Thank you. I went to Princeton. I met Lyle at Princeton. I was a senior when he was a freshman.
And are you a tennis player, or were you a tennis player before you went to law school?
Yes.
Were you on the Princeton tennis team?
I played junior varsity mostly, but I practiced with the varsity some.
Is that how you got to know Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
In the fall of 1988, did you come to California in order to practice tennis with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And did you take up residence at that point with the Menendez family?
Yes.
When you came here in the fall of 1988, where was the family residing?
They had a house in Calabasas, a small rented house.
And did you move into that house?
Yes.
And at some point after you moved into that house, did the family move to a new house?
In Beverly Hills.
And how long after you started living with them did they move to Beverly Hills?
3 or 4 weeks, maybe. I think.
And did you continue your residence with the family when they moved to Beverly Hills?
Yes.
When the family moved to Beverly Hills, where did Lyle take up residence?
Lyle lived in the guest house. There's a main house, and then in the back, past the swimming pool, is a guest house.
And from the beginning, he lived there?
Yeah, right away.
And where did you live?
I lived in the main house, at the top of the stairs, in the gray room on the right.
You say the gray room. Why was it called that?
Well, each of the rooms was basically a different color scheme. Mine was mostly gray and maroon.
And where did Erik Menendez live when you were living in the gray room?
He lived down the hall from me. I don't know, his room was kind of brown.
Okay. Is that the brown?
Tan, I don't
The
know,
tan room.
something like that.
For how many weeks or months did you live continuously at the Beverly Hills house?
Okay, well, I lived there from, I guess, the middle of October. I got to California in the middle of September, so about the middle of October through until the middle of December. And then I went home to Boston, where I'm from, for Christmas. And then I
And
came,
how long were you gone for that break for Christmas?
I think, 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. So you were gone. By the way, before you went, was there a party, a Christmas party at the house?
That was after I left.
Okay, so you were gone by the time of the party.
Right.
Were you, before you left, had the house been professionally decorated yet?
I don't think so. I think it was when I came back that I saw the decoration.
When you came back, did you see that the house was professionally decorated in a Christmas theme?
Well, there was a very big tree and lots of decoration. I didn't know it was professional or not, but
Okay.
sure.
And apart from the tree, were there also like floral centerpieces and bunting on the staircase and things like that?
There were, I don't know what bunting is, but there were
Like
things
wrapped
on the staircase.
boughs
Yes.
of greenery. And how long, if you remember, and I know I've never asked you this before, but how long, if you remember, did this Christmas stuff stay in the house?
Jeez. I really don't remember.
Do you recall if it stayed even after it had all turned brown and wilted?
I don't recall.
Okay. When you came back from Boston, how long did you continuously maintain residence with the Menendez family before you left again?
I think it was about a month and a half, early January to about the middle of February. And then I left for a month to play tennis in a tournament in Israel. And then I came back.
Is there a tournament in Israel? Is this the professional tennis tournament?
Right. Mhm.
And were you trying to become a professional tennis player at that time?
Yes.
Is there a tournament in Israel every February to March?
Yes. Mhm.
And are you aware that Erik Menendez went on that same tour the next
Yes.
year? Now, during the time that you lived in the Beverly Hills house, did you become aware of any practice of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez concerning locking the door to their bedroom?
They did that on a consistent basis. They usually go up to bed pretty shortly after dinner and usually lock the door.
And this was from the very beginning when they moved into that house?
As far as I can remember, yes.
Are you aware of any occasions that you can remember when Mr. or Mrs. Menendez fell asleep in the family room watching television?
No.
Are you aware of their practice with respect to watching television in the evenings?
Like I said, they usually went upstairs after dinner. So I don't remember them watching television at all in the den. I watched television in the den. But I think they had a big screen TV upstairs. I think they mostly watched TV upstairs.
Now, how would you describe this house with respect to whether it was one in which sounds traveled easily from room to room or didn't travel easily from room to room?
It's hard for me to say exactly. I mean, from my room, I don't remember hearing a lot of loud noises. I had a little stereo as well, so I don't remember it being loud. I don't remember hearing things through the walls, but I'm no expert at sound.
But it seemed quiet in your room.
Yeah.
And you said Erik's room, was that on the same floor as yours?
Yeah, it was just right down the hall.
And when Erik was in his bedroom, by the way, was his door usually left open or was it closed?
I think it was usually closed.
And could you hear any sounds from Erik's room when you were in your room?
I don't think I remember ever hearing any sounds from Erik's room at all. I mean, when I was in my room.
And when you were living there during this period from October 88 to mid-February, Erik was how old?
Erik was a senior in high school, so he had his 18th birthday while I was there.
So he was 17 and 18.
Mhm.
Yes?
Yes.
And do you know if he tended to spend the usual teenager's amount of time on the telephone? I'll rephrase the question. Did he seem to spend a lot of time
He
on the
spent a
telephone?
lot of time on the telephone.
And could you hear him on the telephone from your room?
No.
And did he listen to music as teenagers tend to do?
Yes. I don't remember exactly when, but he was in his room. He'd listen to music, talk on the phone. Sure.
You were frequently in his room with him. And,
Yes.
okay, so you knew he liked music, listened to music.
Yes.
But did you ever hear music coming from his room when you were in your room?
I don't remember hearing music from my room. I don't remember him listening to it particularly loudly, though,
Okay.
to tell you the truth.
Now, were you aware that the family employed a maid at the Beverly Hills house?
I think they had two maids. One came, and then I guess she got in a little bit of trouble, and the other one came.
Okay. And do you recall where the maid's room was in the house?
Yes. Downstairs, after you go through the kitchen, there's a little sort of a breakfast room. To the right of that was the maid's room. Sorry, I'll do the best I can.
So the maid's room was close to this breakfast room.
Yes.
And did one particular member of the Menendez family appear to spend a substantial amount of time in the breakfast room?
Mrs. Menendez was in there a large part of the day, at least all morning and a lot of the day.
And what would you observe her doing in the breakfast room that kept her there for a large part of the day?
She was on the phone. She called constantly. They were building a new house in Calabasas, and she was always on the phone with, I don't know, some contract or something. There was always some kind of problem, and she was in there on the phone.
And did you ever overhear her on the phone dealing with that where she was animated or upset or angry?
Frequently.
And did you ever hear her raise her voice while having these conversations?
I don't think she yelled into the phone, but she was certainly angry with the contractor people that weren't doing what they were supposed to do.
And did you ever see her and hear her yelling in that breakfast room?
Yes, but not relating to on the telephone.
I know, but in other
Yes, a
instances,
couple
you
of
saw her
times.
yelling.
A couple of times, sure.
And did you see her yelling at her son Lyle?
Yes.
And was this on more than one occasion?
Yes.
And was there a pattern to how she would, well, let me strike that. Was there a pattern to how she would appear from an emotional perspective when she was yelling at Lyle? I mean, would it be just a short burst and then it's over? Or would it be something that escalated, that sort of thing?
Well, okay. The way it worked is that we traveled through the breakfast room a lot to and from the house where we'd have breakfast and the tennis court. So as she saw Lyle come in from the guest house and travel back and forth, each time she saw him, the confrontation tended to get to be a little bit more abrasive each time. It got a little worse.
She would confront him?
Pretty much on a regular basis as we went through.
And during these confrontations, did she appear and express anger at him?
Yes.
Did he act angry and loud in return?
Rarely.
And would she If he did not respond, did that end her outburst?
No,
What would happen if he did not respond?
she would get more angry.
Now, was there a physical posture that you observed that she would frequently assume when she was angry this way?
Yes.
And could you show us what it was?
After a while, she'd kind of work up, in her, she'd kind of give me one of these, oh, my son, So it was like that. It was kind of a fist clenching thing, like about here.
Mr. Fenno, you smile and you laugh when you describe this. Was it funny at the time?
Yes and no. It got kind of repetitive, so it got
So you
kind
didn't
of
take
silly.
it seriously?
I didn't think Lyle was in danger for his life. I mean, no.
Okay, but this was a behavior you saw over and over and over again?
Yes.
Were you there when Lyle was 5 or 6 and she did it?
No.
Now, were you aware that there were 3 different phone lines at that house?
Yes.
And were you aware of where those different lines could be answered from at the time you lived there?
There were a couple of different places. I can't remember exactly all of them. I know that at least the breakfast room had all 3 lines and the den had all 3 lines. And there may have been other rooms that had all 3 lines. I can't really remember.
So even if Erik had a phone in his room and it had a particular phone number, people in the rest of the house could pick up that line.
We used to answer Eric's phone in the den a lot.
And the same would be true of the line that was supposedly Lyle's in the guest house. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could answer Lyle's guest house phone in the main house as well.
So if someone, for example, wanted to call, say, from Eric's line to Lyle's line, someone in the den or in the breakfast room or somewhere else could pick that phone up.
Yes.
Now, when you first went to stay with the Menendez family, did you feel that you were welcomed equally by both parents?
Yes.
And did you feel that that continued?
No. I was under the impression that I was invited to stay for 3 months, pretty much through December. After being there about a month, I got the feeling that neither parent was particularly interested in having my being there. Mrs. Menendez didn't mind so much, but Mr. Menendez got less and less interested in my being there.
So his behavior towards you changed?
Yes, he talked to me less and less. He was less excited to see me.
So you felt,
I think I overstayed my welcome, to tell you the truth, but anyway.
okay, that the sense you got was that he felt you overstayed
Right.
your welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in January of 1989, did Lyle Menendez return to Princeton?
Yes.
And so you stayed on for some period of time after Lyle was gone.
Yes.
Did you practice with Erik during that time, or?
Before Christmas, I told Erik that I would love to stay if that was okay with him and his family. And he said he would ask his parents. And I guess they said yes, because he said, sure, it's okay if you come back for a couple of months afterward. So I did.
And that time, were you practicing and playing tennis with Erik?
Yes.
Now, were you as good a tennis player as Lyle?
No.
Were you as good a tennis player as Erik?
Erik and I were very even.
Did you become friends with Erik?
Yes.
Did you like him?
Yes.
Would you spend time talking to Erik in his room?
Yes.
Were there occasions when your visits with Erik would be stopped or interrupted?
Yes.
Would you describe how that would happen?
On a pretty regular basis. Mr. Menendez would come, either he would let Erik know ahead of time or he would actually come to the room and I would have to leave. It would either be Mr. Menendez would come in and he'd say, Edward, it's time for you to leave. Or Erik would tell me ahead of time, my dad's coming up. You got to go. So I'd leave.
You'd leave. And when you'd leave, Mr. Menendez and Erik would be in the room?
Mr. Menendez would close the door behind him.
Now, before Lyle had left for Princeton, did you ever observe Mr. Menendez and Lyle having lengthy discussions somewhere in the house?
Yes.
And was this a routine thing or was it rare?
Somewhere in between routine and rare.
So it was something that happened once in a while?
On a reasonable basis. I mean, yeah, I don't know, once in a while. That's good.
Okay. Where in the house would you see these conversations or discussions?
Yeah. They had, there's sort of a downstairs study where Mr. Menendez would do work and he would bring Lyle into the study and they'd talk.
Okay, and did you ever overhear any portions of these conversations?
Not really. I didn't think it was my place to listen.
Okay, well, you had told me at one time that you characterized these discussions as a particular type of talk.
Well, it was, I could hear the speaking. I couldn't tell very much about what they said, but I mean, it was talking. I mean, I don't know.
Well, did you characterize what kind of talk this was?
I can tell you from what Lyle told me afterward, if that's what you're asking me.
Okay, then why don't you tell us, not offered for the truth, Your Honor, what Lyle told you afterwards about what the nature, not what was said, but the nature of the
Right.
discussions.
The conversations were generally Mr. Menendez teaching Lyle about whatever, about tennis or about how to do something, how his life should progress.
Educational, would you say?
Educational.
Instructional, would you say?
Yeah, instructional.
Directional, would you say?
Directional, that's, yeah.
And did you observe in the interaction of this family the extent to which Mr. Menendez exercised decision-making and control over Lyle's life?
I observed it, yes.
And if you could characterize, what would you say was the extent to which Mr. Menendez exerted decision-making and control over Lyle's life?
Mr. Menendez attempted to exert, as far as I could tell, pretty much complete control, but didn't always manage to get it. I mean, Lyle, tried to do some stuff for himself.
Okay. When it came to anything affecting his future, his schooling, his goals, was that
His future schooling, his girlfriends, a lot of times. I remember he tried to set up Lyle with some girl who was going to go to Princeton. He thought that would be the kind of girl Lyle should go out with.
And did that seem to you unusual, at least in your experience, for a parent of a person as old as Lyle to be exercising that kind of control?
Yes.
Would you say that you observed what you thought was a lot of control, a little control, medium control?
I would call it a lot of control.
Did you observe, strike that. Did you ever observe Mr. Menendez having discussions with Erik in that study, that paneled room downstairs?
I don't remember seeing that. I think he just talked to Lyle down there.
Is it your recollection? Well, strike that. You've indicated that there would be these times when Mr. Menendez would come into Erik's room and you'd leave and they'd be in there together. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Mhm.
Are you aware of any other place in the house besides Erik's bedroom where he and his father would go off alone?
I don't remember. I think he spent pretty much all of his alone time with Erik in Erik's room.
Did you know Mr. Fenno, we'll strike that. Besides, you played tennis with Lyle while you were living at the home, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you swim together?
Yes.
Did you go out socially together?
Yes.
Did you hang around a lot?
Yes.
Were you aware that Lyle Menendez wore a hairpiece?
No.
Was it ever mentioned?
Never.
Did Erik ever mention it?
No.
You have a moment, Trona. Testified that Lyle told you what the nature of these discussions with his father in the study were. Did he tell you during the time you were living there?
Yes.
Would he tell you right after these talks, or?
I mean, I don't think he came running to me as soon as he had a talk with his dad, but I don't know if I asked. Sometimes he told me, sometimes he didn't, sometimes I didn't ask.
Okay. But when he did tell you about these discussions, he characterized them in the way that you've described. Is that correct?
There was a lot of directional, educational, and those are good words. I mean, sometimes he was in trouble as well.
Okay. Did there appear to be a rule in this home that Erik and Lyle could do nothing without parental permission, at least a parent rule?
I don't know about nothing. I
Well,
mean, generally they had to get permission to do things, if that's what you mean.
And were there things that they did, to your knowledge, that were perfectly legal and legitimate things, but without parental permission?
Sure.
And did they get in trouble for doing things without permission? Did you ever see Mr. Menendez angry? But let me ask you this. There was an incident, was there not, where you saw Mr. Menendez yelling?
Yes.
Apart from that, were there other times when you saw him angry where he didn't yell?
I believe so. I can't pick one right out.
Was there a particular look or demeanor that Mr. Menendez had that let you know that he was unhappy or angry?
Yes. I mean, he used to smile. He smiles a lot. And he wouldn't smile. He'd give you a very sort of a stern stare. And you knew that he was disappointed or upset or something.
While you lived with the family, Mr. Fenno, did you have your own key to the house?
No.
Did Lyle or Erik have their own key to the house?
I don't think so. There's a key sometimes we could take on the way out, but they never really locked the door. So I don't think we ever took the key, not very often.
Apart from their not locking the door, is your answer that they did not have their own key?
I don't really know if they had their own key.
Did you ever see them use their own key?
I don't think so. If they used a key, I think it would have been, well, we almost never used a key. And if it was, it would have been from the
A
hallway.
common key?
Right.
Okay. Now, the question is, were the doors usually locked or unlocked?
They were unlocked almost always.
And this house had an alarm system, did it not?
Yes.
Are you aware of any time when the alarm was on?
No.
What would happen? I take it that you would go out at night and come back late on occasion.
Yes.
And I take it that Lyle and Erik would do the same.
Yes.
So how would you get in the house if you came back late at night?
We just walk in the front door.
So it was left unlocked?
Right. Yeah.
So would it be unusual if you had gone out at a time, say when the parents were home and they knew you left,
Mhm.
and then you came back and found the door locked?
Yes, very unusual.
In your experience, did that ever happen while you were there?
I seem to remember being locked out once somewhere along the way, but I can't remember whether it was at night or what. I do think we were locked out once. I mean, not completely. We were able to get in a different door.
Do you know if there was a back door that was usually unlocked as well?
There was in the TV room, there were some big doors to the backyard swimming pool area. Those were unlocked most of the time as well.
Now, we had talked before about Mrs. Menendez being in the breakfast room and that this was the scene of these yelling and angry things with Lyle. Is that correct?
Yes,
And that this is the room very close to the maid's room?
yes.
Did you ever see the maid during these yelling or arguments?
Probably. I didn't think about it.
Were you familiar with the contents of the garage at this home?
Yes.
And what was in the garage? Well, first of all, was the contents of the garage unchanged from the time the family moved there until you left?
Yes.
And what was in the garage?
Junk boxes, mostly boxes and boxes of stuff from, I guess, from their old house in New Jersey.
Had you seen boxes and boxes of stuff at the house in Calabasas as well?
I don't. There were some boxes, but not like this. I think they were all in storage.
So things had come out of storage and were now in the garage in Beverly
Right.
Hills? And what made you think these boxes and boxes of stuff were from New Jersey? Did they say?
That's what they told me. That's what the family told me.
And did you ever go through these boxes and boxes of stuff?
No.
Did you ever see either Erik or Lyle going through it?
No.
Did you, during the months that you lived at this house, ever see photographs of Erik and Lyle from their childhood lying around the house?
And I don't think so. They took photographs right then, like while we were playing tennis. There were pictures of us from last week or whatever, but I don't remember seeing childhood photographs at all.
So you didn't see any quantity of like growing up years photographs? Or
No. The family photo album? No, I never saw the family
Never
photo
saw family photo album or albums?
No.
Do you know whether there were photos in those boxes and boxes in the garage?
I don't know.
In seeing the interaction of this family and just focusing on Mr. Menendez's interactions with each of his sons, did he appear to interact with them the same or differently?
That's kind of a big question, but I mean,
Well, let me ask
he
you-
seemed to be more interested in what Lyle was doing, if that's what you mean.
Was he sterner and stricter with Erik or with Lyle?
I think it was even.
Was he stern and strict from what you could see?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Fenno, you have interviewed a number of times with the Beverly Hills Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was the most recent interview on June 4th, well, strike that, on May 24th, 1993.
I'm not sure. It was, I don't know, yeah, that could be right.
If I show you, have you looked at a copy of the report that Detective Zoller initially drafted of
Yes.
that interview? And did you in fact even make some corrections after you received a copy of it?
Yes.
And if I were to show you that report, do you think it might refresh your recollection as to when it was that you were interviewed?
If it has a date on it, sure.
It does.
Okay.
If I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
Now, if you would just look at the very first
Yes.
part.
It says on May 24th, 1993.
And does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it does.
That's when you were interviewed most recently.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Fenno, do you recall a time when you were staying at the Beverly Hills house when you became aware of the fact that Erik had received an acceptance to the University of California, Berkeley?
Yes.
And can you tell us when that was? Roughly.
I believe it was after I came back from Christmas, but before I went to Israel. So that would make it January of 89.
Okay. And to the best of you, well, was there a discussion at the dinner table on this particular day about the fact that Erik had been accepted at Berkeley?
Yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, was this the first college acceptance that he had received?
Yes.
Now, Erik has testified that his parents were both excited that he had got accepted to Berkeley. Would that be an accurate
Yes.
characterization? Did they seem surprised that he had gotten into that school? Did they express surprise?
I think so. It's hard to say. They were very excited. It's hard to say.
Now, did Erik privately tell you what his preference was with respect to UC campuses at that time?
Yes.
And what UC campus did he tell you he preferred in January of 1989?
He told me he'd like to go to UCLA.
And did he indicate whether or not that had anything to do with his perception of their tennis team at UCLA?
He thought UCLA had a better tennis team.
And was it your understanding that wherever Erik went to college, he was going to at least try to be on the tennis team? Did Erik tell you that it was his intention to be on the tennis team?
That was something that was very important, actually. He was one of the reasons I stayed in California after Christmas was so that Erik could train and get a national ranking so that he could get onto the tennis team without having to walk on, so that he would be recruited for the tennis team.
Okay. So was it your understanding then that his tennis playing was a component of his college acceptance?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And did Erik express to you any other reason why he preferred UCLA to Berkeley?
I think so. What happened was the night that he got into Berkeley, he kind of pulled me aside afterward and he said, you know, I think I'd like to go to UCLA. And he said it was because he had friends around here. And so he wanted to be near them.
And you were aware, had you not, that he had moved to California when he was about 15 and a half and left all his friends behind?
I was aware that he moved to California when he was 15 and a half.
Okay. And that he had just moved again from Calabasas to Beverly Hills? And did he appear to have friends from Beverly Hills High School? Did you meet any of those kids?
I met plenty of them.
In fact, you played tennis with a lot of them,
Right.
did you not? Now, do you know when it was that Erik was accepted at UCLA?
No,
Do you believe it was after you left?
I think it was definitely after. It was at least when I went to Israel. It may have been after I came back from that as well. I was only there for about a week after Israel, so I don't really remember.
Well, you say you were only there for a week. You only got back to their home and stayed a week after the Israel tour. And at that time, do you know if he had yet been accepted?
I don't remember.
So you don't recall any conversations about the fact that UCLA had accepted him?
I knew at some point that he got into UCLA.
But you stayed in touch even after you started
Right, we
living
stayed
there.
in touch after.
So you don't know if it was while you were living there or later, do you?
I don't know. I don't know.
Now, were you aware of Erik ever turning Berkeley down?
I assume he must have eventually, but no, I don't know.
You knew that he didn't immediately accept because he wanted to see if he could
Right,
get
right.
into UCLA. Is that
UCLA
correct?
and Brown. He was also waiting to hear from Brown.
He was waiting to hear from Brown also?
Right.
And to your understanding, is Brown an East Coast school?
Right, it's in Rhode Island.
It's in where?
Rhode Island?
And is it an Ivy League school?
Yes.
Now, did you tell Detective Zoller on that May 24th statement that Mr. Menendez was upset because Erik turned down Berkeley?
I may have.
But in fact, you don't have that information that he turned down Berkeley. Isn't that true?
That is true. I mean, when I reread that statement, is that okay if I speak? When
Go
I
ahead, you
reread
may
that statement, I mean, it gives the basic idea of what I said. I'm not sure if I exactly said turn down or whatever, but it's, I mean, basically, yeah, basically, I don't know exactly whether he turned it down. I don't know exactly.
Did you observe?
Excuse me, Rob, could you take a brief recess?
Okay, sure. I will resume at 1:45, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, Mr. Fenno, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking about the interview that you gave to Detective Zoller on May 24th, 1993. Do you recall that you also gave an interview to Detectives Linehan and Zoller in January of 1990, a telephone interview?
I gave a telephone interview with the police. I don't remember who it was with.
Okay, the Beverly Hills Police.
But yeah, the Beverly Hills Police.
Okay. Now, just to get back to a couple of points from your testimony, you indicated that there, the conversations between Mr. Menendez and Lyle, the ones that took place in the study, you mentioned occasionally it might have something to do with Lyle being in some kind of trouble. You recall that?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example, something you remember about what kind of trouble you mean?
I can remember one time where Lyle had promised his parents that he was going to sell his car, so his parents bought him a new car. And I remember that he didn't sell his old car, and he ended up having two cars, and Mr. Menendez was upset about that. They went in and
So
talked.
that was one of those times that he had him in the study.
They talked in the study.
Now, concerning Mrs. Menendez and these confrontations in the breakfast room, what were you said that she would confront Lyle as he was coming in the morning?
Right, from the guest house.
Okay. And what was the topic? I mean, what was she confronting him about?
It was pretty much always chores, household duties.
Did Lyle Menendez ever discuss with you Erik's college and what Lyle's preference for Erik's college was?
Lyle wanted Erik to go to Princeton with Lyle,
Why?
so that he told me so they could be together.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Any examination on behalf of the co-defendant?
Can I see?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Excuse me. I do have one other question.
All right.
You indicated there was only one time you actually heard Mr. Menendez yelling and screaming.
Yes,
Was that an episode that occurred late at night?
yes,
And did it involve a person that Erik knew?
yes.
And who was that person?
Craig Signorelli.
And did you hear Mr. Menendez yelling something at Craig Signorelli?
Yes,
Did this take place outside the Beverly Hills house?
yes.
And when it took place, were you in the gray room?
It took place pretty much in the driveway, and I was in the gray room, which overlooks the driveway.
And you looked out and saw this?
I saw the shapes.
And what did you hear Mr. Menendez yelling at Craig Signorelli?
Can I say the exact words if they're
You
not?
may say the exact words.
Yes, you may do so.
He said, if you ever, it was very loud, but if you ever come around here again, I'll fucking kill you. And it was in a forceful, not like I just said it, but you know what I mean? Loud.
And did you then see Mr. Menendez do something with Erik?
He pretty much pulled Erik back into the house. He took him back in.
Physically pulled him?
I think so.
I have nothing further.
Examination?
Yes.
Mr. Fenno, at the time that this incident occurred with Mr. Signorelli, had you ever met him before?
No, I hadn't.
And did you actually witness the incident with your own eyes?
I heard stuff in the beginning, so then I went to look
And
So-
where did you go to look?
to the bathroom next to the gray room.
So were you inside at the house when you
Yes,
witnessed?
I was inside the house.
And you were on the second story?
Yes,
And you heard Mr. Menendez clearly make this statement?
yes.
Did you actually see Craig Signorelli when this occurred?
I didn't see his face, if that's what you mean,
Okay. How did you know it was Craig Signorelli?
because I don't know exactly. There were two ways.
Your Honor, at this point, we should approach.
All right, you may. All right.
Mr. Fenno, at some time after this incident, were you told that the person in the car was Craig Signorelli?
That was one of the two ways that I knew. Yes,
Okay. How many times in this case have you met with the defense attorneys?
I'm going to object on relevance.
Overruled.
3 or 4.
And do you remember the first time you met with them?
Yes. Trying to get the date. It was after I came to California to go to law school, so it was September or October 19. What's this? This is 93.
91?
91.
Your second year of law school? Or?
It was my first year of law school, about a month after school started.
I believe you indicated you graduated from Princeton University. Would that have been in the spring of 1988?
Yes,
And did you attend Princeton for all 4 years?
yes,
And did you consider yourself to be an athlete while you were there?
yes,
Were you familiar with other athletes who attended Princeton University?
yes.
Were there any athletes at Princeton who were there on athletic scholarships, to your knowledge?
No,
Were there people in the athletics program at Princeton who were not as academically gifted as some of the other students at Princeton?
yes,
You indicated the first house in which you stayed in Calabasas was a small rented house. Is that correct?
yes.
How many bedrooms were in that house, if you recall?
4?
Did you have your own room?
Yes.
What was your understanding of who extended the invitation to you to come and live with the Menendez family?
Lyle did.
Did you have any contact with his parents before you came to live in California?
A little bit.
And could you describe the nature of the contact you had with his parents?
My parents sent his parents a letter. My parents wanted to know if it'd be all right if I came to California. They didn't send a letter back, but we ended up speaking to them on the phone briefly, and they said it'd be fine.
All right, so you had the permission of the parents to come.
Yes.
And at the time that you had this understanding with the parents, did you have an understanding of how long you would live there?
Yes.
And what was that?
About 3 months until Christmas.
And what was your understanding when you came to California as to why you were coming to California to live with the Menendez family?
To play tennis with Lyle. I mean, there are a whole lot of reasons, but the primary reason was to play tennis with Lyle. That would help me get better, help Lyle get better.
Did you have a goal regarding your tennis when you graduated from Princeton?
I wanted to be a professional tennis player.
And did you have any goal as to getting ranked nationally?
I wanted to be ranked nationally and in the world.
Did you eventually obtain a national or worldwide ranking?
Both.
All right. And what was your national ranking, if you recall, the best it ever was?
64th in the amateur division.
And what was your worldwide ranking?
I was 783rd in doubles.
And I believe you indicated that, in your opinion, Lyle Menendez was in fact a superior tennis player to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Erik Menendez was, when you were practicing with him, about the same?
Yes.
And when did you obtain these rankings that you've just described?
The 64th in the country was for the year of 1988. The rankings come out in February of 89.
All right, so what's for calendar year 88?
Right. The other one, I think I reached 783rd. About a year after that. It's hard to remember exactly.
I believe you indicated that after Lyle Menendez returned to Princeton University, you stayed in the family home and you continued to play tennis with Erik Menendez. Is
Yes.
that correct? When you practiced tennis with Erik Menendez, was his father ever present during these practices?
Yes.
And did you observe his father's behavior during your practices?
Yes.
What was he like? How did he act?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, to be honest.
Overruled.
Sometimes he didn't say anything. Sometimes he came onto the court to coach Erik.
All right. Did you ever play tennis against the father?
No.
Do you know if he knew how to play tennis?
I know that he wasn't a very good tennis player
And how do you know that?
because he told me.
Oh, okay. Did you ever see him play tennis?
No, he told me he was a C-level club player, which to me means he's not much of a player.
Okay, I don't play tennis. So what's a C-level club player?
Somebody I could have beat left-handed.
Okay, and you're a right-handed player?
Yes.
All right. Was Mr. Menendez nice to you?
Sometimes.
All right, and when he wasn't nice to you, how did he behave towards you?
He pretty much ignored me completely.
During the period of time that you lived in the home, you were not employed in a full-time job. Is that correct?
Right, yeah.
And during the day when Erik Menendez was in high school and after Lyle Menendez went back to college, did you stay home around the house with Mrs. Menendez?
When Erik went to school, I usually tried to find somebody else to play tennis with.
And where did you play tennis?
Usually on their court in the backyard, on the Menendez court in the backyard.
Did you ever play tennis anywhere else?
Yes,
And that would have been away from the Menendez home?
yes,
Now, at some point, you gave lessons on the tennis court of the Menendez home. Is that
yes.
correct? And did you give some of the proceeds from your tennis lessons to Mr. and Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
Okay, aside from that, did you pay them any rent during the period of time that you were there?
No.
And did they provide you with room and board?
Yes.
How did Mrs. Menendez treat you during the period of time that you were there?
It changed. In the beginning, I was in the very beginning, I was a visitor, and then I was a little more of a family member. But then, like I said, I think maybe my welcome ran out a little bit. She treated me less friendly after that.
You got the impression maybe she wanted you to go home?
Well, we had a talk about it after a while
Okay, and you had a talk with Mrs.
with
Menendez?
Mrs. Menendez.
Was the topic matter the length of your stay?
How long was I going to be staying?
And did you discuss with her how long you would be staying?
Yes, I told her that the impression I was under was that I was supposed to stay until Christmas, and that I had made plans in that regard, and it would be very difficult for me to leave before that.
And what was her response to you after you had this discussion with her? How did she treat you?
Much better.
Okay,
For-
because you told her you'd leave at Christmas?
Well, no, I think because she understood that it wasn't that I was overstaying my welcome. It was just that there was a misunderstanding as to how long I was welcome. I thought I was welcome all that time, and maybe they didn't understand that.
Okay. But you did stay until Christmas, correct?
I did stay until Christmas.
And then you came back after Christmas.
Eric invited me back after Christmas.
Now, did you have any discussion with Mr. and Mrs. Menendez about this extension of your stay when Eric invited you?
No,
And when you came back after your Christmas holiday in Boston, did Mrs. Menendez continue to treat you decently?
yeah, yes,
During the time that you practiced tennis, either with Lyle or Eric, did Mrs. Menendez ever come out and give you coaching tips or tennis tips or anything like that?
I don't think so.
During the period of
don't think
time
so.
that you lived with the Menendez family, did Mr. Menendez travel on business?
Yes,
Could you describe the frequency of his business travels? Was it weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, bi-monthly?
do you mean how long did he travel for, or how
Well-
frequently? How frequently did he travel?
How frequently did he travel?
I don't know. Once every. To my recollection, he made short trips, and they were maybe once every 10 days, once every 2 weeks.
And what by short trips, do you mean less than a week?
Oh, yeah.
And they
yeah,
were
a day or two.
And were they always during the work week, or were they ever over the weekend, if you recall?
I don't really remember.
Do you know if the Mr. and Mrs. Menendez ever traveled with either of their sons to tennis tournaments while you lived in the house?
Yes.
On how many occasions do you recall that happening?
More than half of the tennis tournaments, usually Mr. Menendez would come.
All right. How many tennis tournaments are we talking about that we need to divide in half?
We played one almost every week. So every weekend, I should say. So 15, maybe 15 tournaments. 10, I don't know. It would be in my tennis book. I don't know.
All right. And when you arrived in the Menendez home in Calabasas in September of '88, were these tournaments ongoing at that time? The weekend
Yes.
tournaments?
Yes.
At the time that you lived in the Menendez home, did either of the brothers ever have any other house guests?
Yes.
And could you describe who had the house guests and how long the person was there?
Lyle had 2 guests that stayed with us. He had a friend named Cole, who was a friend, I guess, from high school. And he stayed for probably about a month, I think. And his girlfriend, Jamie, stayed for, I can't remember, intermittent periods with Jamie. She'd come for maybe a week, and I can't really remember with Jamie. She stayed, but I can't remember how long.
Now, when Cole Kruger came for the month, this was both Cole Kruger and Jamie were there while you were there, correct?
Yes,
And when Mr. Kruger came for a month, did he stay in the main house or the guest house?
the guest house.
And when Jamie came, did she stay in the main house or the guest house?
The guest house.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez interact with Jamie?
Yes.
And how did she treat how did Mrs. Menendez treat Jamie?
She treated her okay.
Did you ever see her say anything abusive or offensive to Jamie?
No.
And by Jamie, we're talking about Jamie Pizarczyk, right?
Yes.
I believe you indicated that many times you saw Mrs. Menendez angry while she was in the what was it, the breakfast room in the back of the house?
Yeah, the breakfast room.
And it was your recollection that she was angry because she was having problems with her contractors?
That was a regular reason.
Okay, I take it you've never had remodeling done. Is that
No.
correct? When you saw Mrs. Menendez angry, did you ever see her strike another human being?
No.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez with a weapon, such as a knife or a gun or anything else?
No.
Okay, how about Mr. Menendez? When he was angry, did you ever see him strike anyone?
No.
Did you ever see him with a weapon?
No.
Were you aware of any weapons in the house?
No.
Now, you indicated that there was a study in which Mr. Menendez often had talks with his son Lyle.
Yes.
Do you remember any posters or large photographs in the study of any people?
I don't remember.
Do you remember a photograph of Martin Luther King?
No.
Now, when Lyle was dealing with his mother, you said that oftentimes she would become angry with him as he passed through the breakfast room to go out to the tennis court. Is that correct?
Yes.
And she would be angry about him not doing chores and things like that?
She'd kind of accost him when he first came in the morning, because that's the path he'd often travel from the guest house. And then again as we went out on the tennis court. So that was a regular thing.
And what was the subject matter of her accosting her son?
But like I said, it was pretty much about household duties, chores.
Did you ever see Lyle Menendez perform any of these household duties or chores?
Rarely.
Okay. What was the condition of the guest house in terms of its cleanliness?
I don't know, normal for a 22-year-old kid or whatever.
Okay. What's normal for a 22-year-old kid?
Some clothes around, some, CDs on the floor, but no bugs or whatever.
No bugs?
No food lying around or anything.
Okay.
Sort of normal.
Messy, but still cleanly. Is that how you would
Right,
describe it?
right.
Okay. Did you ever see Lyle Menendez argue with his mother?
No, not really.
All right. Do you remember talking to the police in January of 1990 in your first telephone contact with the Beverly Hills Police Department?
I remember that I spoke with him.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach, please? I'm going to show the witness a copy of the report. Mr. Fenno, I'm going to show you a copy of a front page of a Beverly Hills Police report dated, the date of the interview was January the 12th of 1990. Do you recall that sometime in January of 90 you had a telephone conversation with someone?
Yes.
Okay. And I have two things highlighted, but on the second one, I'd like you to read that to yourself and see if that refreshes your memory.
Yes, refresh my memory.
All right. And you have then an opinion as to whether or not you ever saw, not an opinion, but you have a recollection now of ever seen Lyle Menendez arguing with his mother.
It's still the same opinion. The argument was more one-sided. I mean, Mrs. Menendez would argue and Lyle wouldn't really.
All right. Now,
Yes.
okay. When Lyle Menendez's mother would chastise him or argue with him, did he ever do anything? Did he ever respond to her in any way? Or would he ignore her?
He generally ignored her.
Did you ever hear him say anything to her that was somewhat derogatory, like go jump in a lake or something like that?
I don't think he would say, I don't remember him saying that.
Okay. Do you remember him talking back to her?
Maybe a little.
Okay. Do you remember telling us in May of 1993 that Lyle would ignore her or talk back to her, saying something like, go jump in a lake?
It's more like ignoring. The attitude was, go jump in a lake. I don't know if that he'd say that, but he wouldn't do what she asked him to do.
Now, during the period of time that you were living in the home, did Lyle have a girlfriend named Christy?
Christy came around when I was in Israel. So only during the 1 week after I came back from Israel was I living in the home when he had a girlfriend named Christy.
Did you ever meet Christy?
Yes.
Okay. Did Lyle Menendez ever tell you why he stopped seeing Christy?
No, I'm going to object. This is totally beyond the scope. Also, I would object on hearsay grounds.
Yes, under 1220 of the Evidence Code.
No, I don't believe it's relevant unless it's offered for truth.
It is offered for the truth, and it's offered pursuant to 1220.
It's not an admission.
All right, I'll hear counsel at the sidebar. All right, you may proceed. By the way, I did receive notes from a couple of the jurors regarding your obligations this afternoon, and we'll make sure that you are able to leave in time to do that. All right, you may proceed.
Mr. Fenno, did Lyle Menendez tell you why it was that he stopped seeing Christy?
I don't think so.
Okay, would it refresh your recollection to see a copy of the report of the interview with the prosecution on May the 24th of this year?
Maybe. I have an idea why.
All right, may I touch, please?
Yes.
I'm going to show you the third page of this report and ask you to look at the top part here.
Okay.
All right, does this refresh your recollection as to what Lyle Menendez told you about why he had stopped seeing Christy?
It gives me the same recollection.
And what is your
I'm
recollection?
going to object since he testified he has an idea. There's no foundation for personal knowledge.
What is your recollection, sir?
I think, see, I don't recall whether Lyle told me that he broke up with Christy or I don't know if that's part of the question, but who broke up with who? I don't know. In terms of why they broke up or what the problems were with Christy, I know an answer to that.
All right, and what did Lyle Menendez tell you as to why he broke up with Christy?
Lyle was worried. I don't know if Lyle broke up with Christy, so the question isn't correct. I don't know who broke up with who. Okay, but
Okay, what did
once
Lyle
that's
tell
out of the way,
What did Lyle tell you about why the relationship ended?
I know a problem in the relationship was that Lyle was worried that Christy was going to get pregnant and have his child.
And did he indicate to you that he quit seeing her?
I know they stopped seeing each other.
Okay. Mr. Fenno, have you taken evidence yet in law school?
Yes.
Okay, do you know what the requirements are for impeaching witnesses with statements?
Objection irrelevant.
Mr. Fenno, would you say that in this particular case, your sympathies are with the defendants?
I don't want them to get the death penalty, if that's what you mean.
Okay, would you say that your sympathies are with the defendants then, in that regard at least?
Yes.
Were you present, were you a friend of Lyle Menendez's in the fall of 1987?
Yes.
And were you aware of the reasons why he left Princeton University?
Rona, I'm going to object that this is beyond the scope and cumulative.
Yes.
All right, did Lyle Menendez discuss with you the reasons why he was leaving Princeton University?
I don't remember if he told me, but I found out.
Okay, so you have no independent recollection as to whether or not Lyle Menendez told you?
He probably told me. It was something the tennis team talked about a lot. I don't remember who I heard it from.
You know what hearsay is, right, Mr. Fenno?
Objection, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Fenno, you indicated that there were telephones in the house, and it was your recollection that there were 3 phone lines, correct?
I think there were at least 3.
Okay. Do you know whether or not there were car phones as well?
Yes. There
What
were.
kind of cars did the Menendez family have when you lived with them?
Objection beyond the scope.
In the beginning, Mr. Menendez had a Cadillac, and then he had a big Mercedes. Mrs. Menendez had a smaller Mercedes, I think, the whole time.
How about the defendants? What kind of cars did they have?
Lyle had a Alfa Romeo and then a Volkswagen Beetle or something, and Erik had a Ford Escort.
Now, you indicated that Lyle Menendez was in a little trouble with his father because he wanted to buy a car and sell a car, and he ended up with 2 cars.
Yes.
What was the car he was going to sell, and what was the car he bought?
The Alfa Romeo was the one he was going to sell, and the Volkswagen was the one he bought.
So he did, in fact, have 2 cars at one time, to your knowledge.
Yes.
And I believe you went to visit Lyle Menendez after you left the Menendez house in the spring of 1989.
Yes.
And when you saw him at Princeton University, did he have that car at Princeton, the Beetle?
I don't know.
Did you ever see Mrs. Menendez drinking alcohol?
I believe wine.
All right. Did you
I'm
ever
not really sure.
did you ever see her in a state where you thought she was inebriated?
No.
Did you ever see her in a state where you thought that there was something wrong with her, like she was maybe taking some sort of pills or anything?
She didn't look like she was on drugs.
Now, you were with her many times during the day when no one else was at home. Is that correct?
Actually, not really. I mean, I played my tennis and she did her thing.
During the period of time that you observed the interaction between the defendants and their parents, did you ever see the defendants lie to their parents?
Yes.
And on how many occasions would you say you saw them lying to their parents?
More than a couple.
Was it something that was somewhat common?
Somewhat common.
Okay.
Yes.
And what kinds of things, first of all, did they both do it or just one of them?
Both.
And what kinds of things did they lie to their parents about?
Stuff when they got in trouble, if they did something wrong, you know. There was one time where Lyle, he was driving his dad's Cadillac and he kind of sideswiped me. The mirror got knocked off, and he didn't want to tell him that is what had happened. So I don't remember what the story was, but he told him some other kind of story about how that had happened.
Okay, when he told them the other story, was it a detailed story or was it just sort of vague, you recall?
I think it was reasonably detailed.
Did you ever see Erik Menendez lie to his parents?
Yes.
And what kind of occasion did you see him lie?
The same kind of situation where they'd done something wrong
And didn't take responsibility for what was wrong?
and they didn't take responsibility.
Now, when Mr. Menendez would have these talks with Lyle in the study, that was during the time that Lyle was living in the guest house. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that you were present at a family dinner when the discussion about Erik's acceptance to Berkeley came up. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that both Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were excited or expressed approval of this event. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was the dinner a celebratory dinner? In other words, were they celebrating the fact that he'd gotten into Berkeley?
No.
Okay. Was that a topic of some discussion at the dinner table that night?
Yes.
Now, who cooked dinner when you were there?
Usually Mrs. Menendez, maybe a little more than half the time.
How was her cooking?
I don't know, good pasta.
And when this topic of Berkeley came up, did Mr. Menendez, as well as his wife, express satisfaction or pleasure in the fact that Erik had gotten accepted there?
They were pleased, yeah.
And when you say they, both parents, is that correct?
Yeah, from what I remember, yeah, they were both happy.
All right. Now, do you remember talking to the prosecution again in May of 1993?
Yes.
And that was at the Beverly Hills Police Department with myself and Mr. Kuriyama and Detective Zola, correct?
Yes.
And did you indicate then that Mr. Menendez was upset with Erik because Erik turned down Berkeley?
That's what you have written down.
All right. Well, did you or did you not say that?
I don't know.
Mr. Fenno, do you recall discussing the topic of Berkeley with us
Yes.
in that interview room?
Yes.
And do you recall being asked about it again after you made the first statement?
Objection on its vague.
In the interview, being asked about it while I was with you?
Yes. In other words, after you mentioned the part about the parents being, Mr. Menendez being upset with Erik because he turned down Berkeley, do you remember that we asked you again if that's what happened?
I think so.
All right. Now, after this particular interview with the prosecution and Detective Zoller, you were given a copy of this interview, correct?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, you made some changes to it on June the 9th of 1993.
Yes.
And between those two dates, in fact, you had called back to say that there were some changes that you wanted to make, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And in fact, I called you at your home on your birthday and we didn't speak. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
I'm going to object to that question.
All right. Now, Mr. Fenno, at the time that you made the corrections to the May 24th report, you didn't mention that this particular information about Berkeley was incorrect, did you?
That's true, yes.
Have you met with the defense attorneys since you talked to the prosecution at the Beverly Hills Police Department in May of '93?
Yes,
How many times?
once.
Now, may I approach, please, Your Honor? With the report, page 938. May I approach, please? Mr. Fenno, I'm going to show you the last page of this 3-page report. First of all, do you recognize this report? It says May 24th, 1993, 8:20 p.m.
Yes,
Okay. And did you have a copy of this report shortly after the event occurred? That
Yes.
is the interview. All right. And you see on the third page, the second thing I have underlined in yellow. Do you see the statement there?
yes,
All right. And does this particular statement that Mr. Menendez was upset with Erik because Erik had turned down Berkeley, is it your testimony now that you didn't say that?
I may have said it. My testimony is that it's not quite accurate
Oh, and why isn't it accurate?
because I don't know. I wasn't there when he turned down Berkeley, and I don't know that Mr. Menendez was upset. I told you what happened was the day that Erik got into Berkeley, the Menendez parents were happy. But Erik pulled me aside after and said, I think I'd like to go to UCLA. So that's where I get my information from. So it is very possible that I told you that I thought Mr. Menendez was upset. That would be because I got the impression that Erik felt that his father would be upset.
Well, so what you're telling us now is that you extrapolated from
Right.
two facts. The fact that you told us on May the 24th of 1993 is, in other words, you knew Mr. Menendez wanted Erik to go to Berkeley, and you knew Erik didn't want to go there. Therefore, it was your impression, or you just decided that Mr. Menendez would have been upset.
Yes,
So that, in fact, you never personally saw Mr. Menendez upset with Erik over
right.
turning down
That's
Berkeley.
correct.
So this is just something you kind of made up. Is that right?
It didn't seem like a big deal. I mean, in my mind, Mr. Menendez, I thought, wanted Erik to go to Berkeley, or else Erik wouldn't have told me that on the side. He was worried that his father would be upset with him.
Now, could you describe why you thought Mr. Menendez wanted Erik to go to Berkeley?
He was very excited that he got into Berkeley, and Berkeley's supposed to be better academically than UCLA.
Did Mr. Menendez express that at the dinner table?
I don't think we talked about UCLA, but he was excited about Berkeley.
And during that period of time, did he encourage Erik to go to Berkeley?
I'm not sure that he did. They were waiting to hear from Brown as well and from UCLA.
I believe you indicated that Mr. Menendez used to smile a lot.
Yes.
Would you describe his personality, at least when he was talking to you?
Would I describe his personality?
Yeah, would you describe his personality for us, please?
Yeah, generally he was pretty happy. I mean, at dinner he would, make jokes and we'd talk about stuff. He was an interesting person. He had well thought out opinions about a lot of things, and I found him to be interesting and kind of fun, except for when he didn't look like he wanted me around.
Have you ever seen the television show Jeopardy?
Yes.
Okay, did you ever have dinners with Mr. Menendez where you felt like you were on Jeopardy and you were one of the contestants? In other words, did he ever quiz you in that manner?
I'm not sure quite like that, but yes. I mean, we, there were discussions at dinner where he seemed to already know the answer, and we were going to try to figure it out, if that's what you mean.
And did you enjoy engaging in these discussions with Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
And what was Mrs. Menendez doing when you had these discussions with her husband at the dinner table?
I'm not sure. Sometimes she was there mostly. Occasionally she'd go to the kitchen and get some more food or whatever.
Did she participate in these discussions?
Honestly, I don't really remember her being particularly involved.
Now, I believe you indicated that the doors to the Menendez home, the outside doors, were generally unlocked. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you and either of the two defendants ever come and go out of the back of the house where the alley was?
I did once.
All right. Did you have an automobile when you were here?
Yes.
And was that your own automobile?
Yes.
Did you then drive from Boston?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that in the, I don't know what room you called it, but in one of the rooms there were some French doors. I think you said it was the TV room.
Right. Yes.
And is that the room that had bookshelves with lots of trophies on top?
Yes.
And that was the room at the rear of the house near the kitchen, correct?
As you walked in the front door and went straight down the hallway, you go right into the room that I'm talking about.
All right. And in that particular room, there were a set of French doors behind.
Yeah,
and,
that led toward the jacuzzi.
And those French doors were behind an L-shaped sectional sofa, correct?
Yes.
And that's the TV room.
Yes.
And those French doors were often unlocked?
Yes.
And did you go in and out of those French doors in order to get in and out of the house?
Yes.
Did you ever see either of the defendants do that?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that when Mr. and Mrs. Menendez watched television, or excuse me, that after dinner that they would generally go upstairs.
Yes.
And you would often watch television in that
room. Yeah.
And would you often watch television in that room with either of the two defendants?
Yes, sometimes.
I believe you indicated that during the period of time that that Lyle Menendez had returned to Princeton, that you were then playing tennis more and more with Erik Menendez.
Yes.
And I believe you indicated he had lots of friends.
Yes.
Did you meet many of those friends?
Yes.
You indicated as well that in the garage of the Menendez home that there were lots of boxes.
Yes.
Okay, what are lots of boxes? Are we talking about 10 or 50 or
They were all the way to the roof. It was full.
the whole garage?
The whole garage was full.
And was this a double car garage?
I don't think so. I think it was a single car garage.
Okay, so you're talking about then at least 100 boxes.
I guess. Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
And
a
you
lot
were
of boxes.
you were never made aware of the contents of those boxes, correct?
I believe that I heard that they were from the old house in New Jersey.
But you didn't know what was inside.
No.
When you had the dinner where the subject of Berkeley was brought up, was that the first time you'd ever been made aware of the fact that Erik Menendez had applied to Berkeley?
No.
Did Erik Menendez ever talk to you before that dinner about colleges he'd applied to?
Yes.
And did he tell you that what did he tell you about where he wanted to go to college?
He had a friend at Brown. He was kind of interested in going to Brown. Maybe. I'm not sure if there was more than that. He talked to the Brown people a lot.
So would you say you had more than one discussion with Erik Menendez about where he wanted to go to college?
Yes.
Did Erik Menendez ever tell you that he wanted to go to college far away from home?
He didn't put it like that, no.
Okay. Did he ever indicate to you a desire to get out of Los Angeles and go someplace like Brown, 3,000 miles away from home?
He didn't say anything in that way.
Do you know if Erik Menendez knew how to work a computer?
I don't know. Do I know? I don't think so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, I don't think that I knew.
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor? I'm almost done. Did you ever see any physical violence at all between the Menendez parents and either one of their sons?
No.
Now, after the killings of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, did you ever have any discussion with Lyle Menendez about what had happened on the night of August the 20th of 1989?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
A little. I called him on the phone.
And where did you call him?
I called from Massachusetts to his house in Beverly Hills.
And how long after the killings was it, to your knowledge?
Maybe the next day.
And did Lyle Menendez indicate to you what had happened the night before?
I don't think we talked about that. I called him up. I heard what had happened in the news. And so I called and said I was sorry. Was there anything I could do?
All right. Did you have any discussion about what Lyle Menendez had been doing the night before when you talked to him that time?
No.
Did you ever have any discussion with Lyle Menendez about what had happened the night before?
No.
Your Honor, I have here a police report I'd like to approach. I'm going to show you the second page of the police report from January the 12th of 1990, which I believe was the telephone interview you referred to. I'm going to ask you to look at the thing that's circled and has some yellow in it.
Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection as to the contents of the telephone conversation you had with Lyle Menendez on shortly after the killings of his parents?
Yes.
And did Lyle Menendez tell you anything about his activities of the night before, Mr. Fenno?
Well, it says, I mean, it doesn't really refresh. I don't remember saying that, but I probably did. And I guess we talked about that he went out the night before.
Did he indicate to you at the time that you talked to him that he had come upon his parents in the den?
If that's what it says there, then I guess that's what I said. I don't remember. What I remember is what I just told you, is that I called to offer him condolences. I mean,
All right, and so you don't remember anything else?
I don't remember anything else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fenno. I have nothing further.
Yes, very good. Mr. Fenno, do you know a young woman named Tracy Baker?
Yes.
And do you recall her being a friend of Lyle Menendez's during the time that you were living there?
Yes.
And you recall back to the episode where Mr. Menendez threatened to kill Craig Signorelli?
Yes.
Do you recall if Tracy Baker was around at that time?
I don't personally know if I don't personally remember.
You don't personally remember if she was there that night?
Right. She was around, I don't know, she was around a good bit for about a month or so. It is possible that she was there that night.
Was that month around Thanksgiving? Was it preceding Thanksgiving of 1988? If you remember.
I think so. Jeez. I'm not positive. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Now, you've testified that you had a copy of the interview that the police did with you in May of 93, and you made corrections after you saw that. Did they ever send you a copy of the January interview? January 1990?
No.
Did the police during the January interview ask if they could tape record that interview?
They might have. I don't remember. It was.
Okay. Would you have refused if they had asked?
No, I would have let him.
And do you recall how long that January interview was on the phone?
I think it was a couple hours.
And how long is the report of it?
It was 2 or 3 pages. Did you just show me? 2 or 3 pages?
And did that appear, were you surprised when you first saw that 2 or 3 page report that that's all that was written for a 2-hour interview?
Yes.
Did you ever hear Lyle or Erik talk back to their father?
No.
Did you ever hear their father praise their effort if they didn't win?
If they did not win?
Yeah,
No.
they lost.
It wasn't like that. It was, no.
There was no support for trying, was there?
Mr. Menendez would tell Lyle what he should have done to win, but that was it.
How many hours a day when you were living with the Menendez family did Lyle and Erik practice tennis?
Lyle played for 5 hours a day, and Erik played after school. So Erik played maybe 2 hours a day during school and then more on the weekend.
And during the time you were there, was Erik also being coached? Was he going somewhere for coaching?
About halfway through, they both got a new coach.
And was there additional play with the coach?
Yes.
And do you know if Erik practiced at school also?
Yes, in the spring he did. Yeah.
I might have a moment. Were you aware, Mr. Fenno, of Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's attitudes towards Lyle's girlfriends?
Yes.
And how would you describe that attitude?
I didn't think that they particularly cared for. Jamie was sort of medium, and I don't think they liked Christy.
When you say medium, that they were medium towards Jamie, which means they...
She was okay, but not great. I mean, medium.
And what was their criticism, if you know, of Jamie?
I don't think Jamie was from the same social level that the kids were.
At least that was the parents' perception.
Objection calls for speculation.
Are we talking about the parents' attitude?
I believe, I'm somewhat vague on this. I believe that was their attitude.
Did they think she was a gold digger?
I'm not sure.
Did you?
Objection. Improper.
Did Lyle appear to be generous towards Jamie with presents and things like that?
Yes, very.
And did Jamie demand those things?
Sometimes, yes.
I have nothing further.
Ross.
Yeah.
And does this complete the examination of this witness at this time?
No,
This time, yes.
no. I think there's something for one to reopen.
Oh, very briefly, yeah. And I'd like to do it before noon.
All right, we will certainly try. Let me see counsel at the sidebar, however. All right, as far as the trial is concerned and the gold jury, this will complete your obligation to be here today. They're basically going to run out of witnesses as far as today is concerned when this witness is completed, and there's some brief testimony before the blue jury only. So we'll let you folks go at this time and ask that you come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you all back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The blue jury, please remain.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Continue your examination before the blue jury.
Turning your attention to the night that Mr. Menendez threatened to kill Craig Signorelli, did you ask Erik what that was about, why his father wanted to kill Craig Signorelli?
Yes.
And what did Erik tell you?
He told me that Craig had been the person who had made him join the robberies that were going on in Calabasas, and that Mr. Menendez didn't want him around.
That Craig had gotten Erik involved?
Right, Craig had gotten Erik involved.
Nothing further.
A cross-examination.
May I speak to this?
Yes.
Mr. Fenno, did you ever have any further discussions or other discussions with Erik Menendez about these burglaries?
Maybe once or twice.
And do you remember the subject matter? What part of the burglaries were you discussing?
I remember that he told me his dad had to pay for all the stuff. They basically had to take everything back, and everything that wasn't taken back, he had to pay for.
And did he give you any other information about the burglaries?
Yes. I think he said he was only involved in one.
Did he tell you how much money his father had to pay back?
Something like $60,000 to $70,000, I thought I heard.
Did Erik Menendez ever indicate to you whether or not his father was happy with him for having participated in this?
I think he was unhappy.
Right, and why do you say that?
I don't know if it was because he told me or because any parent would be unhappy. I mean,
Your Honor, we just like the answer to speculation.
Overall, the answer will stay.
Did Erik Menendez ever tell you if his brother had participated with him?
no,
Did you have any information from Lyle Menendez that he participated with Erik in these things?
not from one.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else?
No.
All right, thank you. You're excused today, but you're to remain on call for further testimony. Okay, thank you. All right, as to the blue jury, we'll excuse you at this point and have you come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock as well. Don't discuss this matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. We'd ask that Mr. Sullivan remain behind for a moment. I want to speak to you. Everyone else is excused till tomorrow at 9. We have some matters to discuss in relationship to proposed testimony in this matter. First of all, there are some witnesses who are going to be called by the defense, and there were some objections, as I understand it, by the prosecution. And we were about to start that discussion yesterday when I learned that the prosecution didn't have the same materials that the defense had presented to me.
Copy of the first Roger Smith interview that the court has, and in marking I marked the prosecution's copy yesterday to match what I had marked the court. However, I noticed that the court's missing a page. Somehow didn't get copied when the prosecution copied the rest, and I believe, Your Honor, it's this page. I mean, they don't have numbers. I don't know why. If I may approach. And I'm not seeking to introduce anything from this picture. I'm just seeking, if I could, I'll show you what it goes. It's the next one. It's the next one. I should go right to your, it's this one. And I am seeking to introduce this.
Okay.
I'll need that back later on.
Which one do you want to deal with first?
Mr. Lewis?
Sure, it's shorter.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I have that statement here.
Is that a 3-page statement, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you want us to begin?
Well, in relationship to those things that are underlined or highlighted, are there any of those things that you do not object to?
Yes, except that we object to Mr. Lewis in his entirety. First of all, I'm not clear on the time period that is covered here. It appears at the bottom of page 1 that there's something to Chicago office in 76, but it is unclear how many years or months this relationship covered. And the objection would be that this is cumulative, it's remote, and in addition, it's cumulative to Mr. Smith's testimony and other testimony. It's remote in time, and over prosecution objection, Mr. Baralt, who worked for Mr. Menendez in Chicago, and we know from the house chart that that the family lived in Chicago for a short period of time. Mr. Baralt already testified to management style of Mr. Menendez. So I think that between Mr. Baralt and Mr. Smith, that there would be enough of a flavor of Mr. Menendez at work that Mr. Lewis should not have to testify.
Well, Mr. Smith aside, I haven't ruled on whether his testimony is admissible or what if it is, what if any of it is. Just dealing with this by itself.
All right, well, dealing with it by itself, there,
Let's turn on your mics and move your mics closer to you so you'll be heard.
Your Honor, if in fact the court were inclined to overrule the people's objection that this is too remote, certainly the first full paragraph are things that we would not object to. But the second paragraph, starting with the word regarding lowballing.
All right, let me hear from the defense as to why this is relevant. First, as to time frame and overall relevancy and
I think
admissibility.
Mr. Menendez is confusing the reference to Chicago. Mr. Lillis worked for Hertz. Mr. Menendez worked for Hertz after he, Mr. Menendez, left Chicago. And he worked for Hertz, my understanding is until 1980, I believe. And it's my understanding that Mr. Lillis stayed with Hertz until approximately 1979. The basic relevancy is we had very brief testimony from Mr. Baralt about Mr. Menendez's management style, if you want to call it that. It's his people relating style that's important here. It has nothing to do with business per se. During the period when they lived in Chicago, which was 1970-71. And so this is a later period. It's a time when Erik and Lyle are older. Mr. Lillis overhears Mr. Menendez talking to his rather young children and the kinds of things he was saying to them. It also shows that Mr. Lillis tried to intervene with Mr. Menendez. I mean, that obviously even to a business associate, the way Mr. Menendez was talking to his children on the phone was unusual enough for Mr. Lillis to tell him he was going to kill those kids, like he was killing the young kids, the subordinates at Hertz. And Mr. Menendez is, of course, putting off that kind of remark as he did around family. The purpose of calling him Mr. Lillis, who won't be a very long witness, is to show the consistency in Menendez's personality, the consistency of how he treated weaker and more vulnerable people, such as subordinates and children, the consistency in his philosophy, basically, of personal ruthlessness, the consistency in the notion that appearances were important to him, that he'd never let anybody have anything on him or show weakness, because all of that corroborates family witnesses who are no doubt going to be attacked on the basis of their bias because they're family witnesses. And it corroborates the defendants who, of course, have been attacked on every possible ground. Mr. Menendez was not one of those people, apparently, who had one persona at the office and another persona at home. He was consistent. And this is to show behaviors that are consistent with character traits and with mental states and attitudes on Mr. Menendez's part that directly affected his relationship with his children. The business about lowballing, I mean, that specific thing is to show that when Mr. Menendez threatened to pay somebody back, he made good on the threats.
All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, the court finds that this evidence is remote and it's events occurring a long time ago, and the offer of proof doesn't establish any relevance to these issues in this trial, and any probative value, which is slight, is certainly outweighed by its potential to confuse issues and consume undue amount of time and mislead the jury. We would be litigating events occurring in a business setting well over 10 years ago. Therefore, the court sustains the people's objection under Section 352 of the Evidence Code to Mr. Lillis. Whereabouts does Mr. Lillis live, by the way?
Ohio.
He was going to be brought in from Ohio to testify about these matters?
Excuse me?
He was going to be brought in from Ohio to testify about these matters?
Presumably, since he's in Ohio.
Okay. Well, then he can stay there. All right,
I don't understand why the court would make a gratuitous remark like that. I really
none. I just don't see how it would justify, in addition to the other factors I've articulated here, the cost of bringing this man here to testify about these matters. So the objection is sustained.
on that basis as well as the other.
No, that was just, as you said, gratuitous remark. All right, let's go on to Mr. Smith. What is the offer of proof as to him?
You have it in front of you.
And you intend to offer everything here that is contained in this particular document?
No, everything that's highlighted.
That's what I mean.
Yes, sir. This is not remote.
Let me mark Mr. Lillis's report so it's part of the record here, the interview that was highlighted as Exhibit 318. And that'll be for identification purposes only. And what is the people's position in regards to Mr. Smith?
Well, Your Honor, insofar as Mr. Smith was present at the corporation when Lyle Menendez was employed there, those character traits of the father that would have been apparent to Lyle Menendez, we don't object to having testimony about. And as well as the meetings that occurred after the deaths of the parents, I believe there's a reference at, there's 3 pages from the end, assuming that we have the same number of pages, 3 pages from the end in the middle of the single space typewritten report. Does the court have something bracketed in either colored ink or?
Talking about the second.
It's the second, yeah, 3 pages from the end of the whole package. Mine's all. Does the court have 2 different reports?
Yes.
All right, in the second report, 3 pages from the end, it says when the boys were informed.
Yes, I do have that.
All right, and we have no objection to that particular incident. But as far as the incidents, some of the, in the first report, some of the things appear to be speculation and opinion of Mr. Smith without adequate foundation. And as to the ways that he treated other people, that wouldn't be relevant unless Lyle Menendez was made aware of that kind of behavior when he was in fact employed at Live during that summer.
All right. So the people's position is no objection to 2 items and the balance if the defendant was present or aware of them. Is that basically your?
Yes, that's basically our analysis.
Okay. And the defense position?
That's too restrictive, Your Honor. What we're trying to demonstrate here are character traits of Mr. Menendez that involve the way he treated his children. And the personality style. I mean, the prosecution had been asking people, witnesses the last 2 days, describe Mr. Menendez's personality. That's what we're talking about here, his personality and his style and to some extent his character. And this is the man who was number 2 to him, working in this business, was intimately familiar with the way that Mr. Menendez dealt with people, describes him as an extremely intimidating bully, and can give a ruthless, arrogant man, and can give examples of that. And were this behavior that was remarkably different from what had been described by people who observed him in a family context, I would agree it had no relevancy here. But what's amazing about it is that it's remarkably the same. And the point is to show that even in another setting, surrounded with adults, this man was a ruthless, intimidating bully. That's how he affected his children. That's what made them afraid of him. Mr. Smith is not related. He has no bias. He corroborates witnesses who would otherwise be impeachable on those grounds. As far as specific things that may be speculation or conclusion, people certainly know how to object in this case if the question is eliciting speculation or conclusions, and I'm sure the court would sustain any such valid objections. But as to the general area, they have been free to explore Mr. Menendez's personality in a very wide-ranging way. And I don't think that someone who worked intimately with him is any less qualified to describe his personality than others.
All right. I don't know if I would characterize the prosecution's efforts of asking a few witnesses questions and the answers that were given as questioning quite as broadly as you have described it here.
Well, they might not have gotten as broad an answer as they wanted, but when you're
They
asking,
didn't ask the broad questions that you're proposing to ask. They don't go into the detail that you are proposing here by what you've outlined, which is concern to the court that you intend to go into minute detail about behavior in an office setting, which really is different than a home
we
setting.
don't- I don't need to go into the details of each example, Your Honor, as long as the witness is allowed to, so long as it's understood that he has a factual basis for his opinions. I do intend to go into detail for Mr. Smith's observations of interaction between Mr. Menendez and his sons, particularly the telephone conversation.
Oh, that's clearly relevant, and people are not objecting to that, certainly appropriate. But when you get beyond that to how he dealt with other people and business dealings and whether he cut a good deal or a bad deal and whether he,
I don't think I
his
even,
business tactics were those that would be approved by others really is irrelevant.
those things. I haven't highlighted the business tactics, whether he cut good deals or bad deals, whether he cheated Mr. Mitchell or didn't cheat Mr. Mitchell. None of that is outlined. What's outlined is behaviors on his part that were aimed at humiliating people, intimidating people, discounting.
Even that, by going into repeated examples would fall within a 352 analysis. But if you wanted to have his opinion,
Right,
state an
right.
opinion about an aggressive personality and things of that nature, that's
We don't
certainly
have to go
character
into all
evidence that
the,
you can bring.
We don't have to go into every meeting there's occurred.
When you say that, I don't interpret that to mean you go in all but one or something of that nature, but
Well, I mean, you can never stop a witness from saying in the middle of a sentence, for example, I'm not going to
oh
ask
yeah,
you to
you
describe.
certainly can. I can't.
You can. Yes,
The court does.
I can.
Believe it or not, the court has discretion to
I've
do things
noticed
like
that you exercise it sometimes, but as I'm sure you've noticed, we sometimes ask a question of a witness. We don't exactly get what we're expecting, so
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, all right, then, Mr. Smith, he's going to be available tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and let's see, as I recall, there was another statement provided to me, but I don't have it here anymore. You took it back.
And if we could, we're not calling that witness tomorrow, and we'd like to have a better idea of where we're going on all this Ozil stuff before we know what to do with her.
Okay, all right. Any other witnesses then that are subject of discussion for tomorrow? I don't know who all you have scheduled.
At this point, last night we attempted to contact Dr. Summerfield, Dr. Emery, and Dr. Cox. Dr. Emery, we still have not been able to get in touch with. We paged him, we've called both of the hospitals he works at. We're trying to get him for tomorrow. Dr. Summerfield is out of town. It means Wednesday for our purposes, and assuming he's available Wednesday. Dr. Cox is available tomorrow. So we have him coming in, and it was my thought that I could get the basic stuff out of Dr. Cox, and then when Dr. Emery testified, it would just be any additional information they have, so it wouldn't be cumulative. But other than that, I don't have any witnesses for tomorrow because we couldn't, by 5:15 last night when I could make phone calls, it was, we were not able to reach Emery, and we did find out what I've just reported about Summerfield.
Well, as I said yesterday, I didn't particularly invite you to call all three of them, that there certainly is repetition and remoteness as to some of the testimony, and there could be stipulations even worked out as to Emery, since basically he's being called to testify to prescriptions, is that right?
Well,
Or
the
maybe a visit at a
medication,
hospital?
The difficulty is that we need Dr. Emery to testify not only to what medication, but the significance of the dosage.
Well, as I recall the report that you provided to me, he couldn't really say that different people require different dosage, and it really doesn't prove anything.
No, what he can say, number one, he can say what his diagnosis is. You would like him to testify to what his diagnosis was, why he prescribed the medication. The fact that Mrs. Menendez would not reveal the source of her depression, just that she had this tremendous depression. And that the medication that he was giving her was at the maximum level possible to give somebody safely. I believe that's going to be his testimony. I think Mr. Bird has spoken with him personally.
All right, that's a little different than my recollection of the report. Maybe I'm recollecting, or I'm thinking of a different report, but my recollection was that he couldn't say how much one person needs versus another.
No. I think it's Go ahead.
The other additional fact, Your Honor, is Ms. Bazanich did put into issue through the cross-examination of Mr. Fenno this morning her drug and alcohol use. And it wasn't what effect it had. It was, did you ever see her taking pills or drinking alcohol? And I think that raises an issue that needs to get rebutted at that point through the testimony of Dr. Emery.
No, I think I said yesterday you could bring out the substance abuse if that
I think what the court may
was
be
part of his analysis.
referring to is, I think we may have indicated that both Dr. Summerfield and Dr. Cox were psychologists, and they're not in a position to testify to the significance of the dosage of the medication.
No, I realize that. I just thought I recall that from Dr. Emery, but it doesn't matter. If you feel that there's evidence that requires his testimony, it can't be worked out by stipulation, that's fine. As long as it's not duplicative and it doesn't get into the hearsay areas that I discussed with counsel yesterday of accounting for various incidents in her life and how she described them, which, unless the area is opened by the prosecution, would be inadmissible hearsay. All right. In regards then to the issue relating to the December 11th session, what I will do is hand out to the defense a proposed, or a findings of fact, not proposed, these are my findings of fact. I give them to the defense just for the purpose of review prior to giving it to the prosecution, so the defense can make any objections relating to whether the findings of fact disclose those things that the defense feels are still privileged or were revealed solely for the purpose of permitting the court to rule on the matter. And that after that, if there are objections, I'll hear from those or about those from the defense, and then provide the findings of fact to the prosecution. I try to make these findings of fact in such a way that it won't require much, if any, modification before it goes to the prosecution. So I will do that now, and I notice Ms. Abramson left point of personal necessity, and I'll give counsel these findings of fact, and we'll take a break, and when she's back and we're all ready, we'll discuss it. Not at the moment. You can do what you want, but I'm going to give this to the defense, and then if they feel that there's a need for a hearing in a closed setting, we'll certainly do that.